Hello everyone, it's 7 o'clock. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Vindication for postmasters. The government will introduce emergency laws to quash hundreds of false convictions. And this morning, the public inquiry resumes with pressure mounting for those responsible for the scandal to be held to account. It's Thursday, the 11th of January. Questions for the inquiry over why post office investigators were given cash bonuses for successful convictions during the Horizon scandal. Also ahead, the number of women who die during pregnancy has risen to its highest level in 20 years. The International Court of Justice considers whether Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie pulls out of the Republican presidential race but predicts Donald Trump's rivals are going to get smoked. The family of a murder victim mistaken for Rupert Murdoch's wife offer a farmer £40,000 to let them dig up the land where they believe she was buried. And could this be the car of the future? A flying car is unveiled at the CES Tech Summit in Las Vegas. Hello, a very good morning. So now we know that hundreds of wrongly convicted postmasters will finally see justice. So let's get more on that because we've got Serena and Molly here on the sofa. And Serena, that's exactly what you're going to be talking about today, isn't it?
Yes, so the Prime Minister announced he will bring primary legislation which brings justice, as you say, to hundreds of postmasters. I think conversations now will turn to how this was allowed to happen and who's to blame.
OK, more from you on that shortly. And Molly, what are you focusing on today?
There's been a real rise in the number of women that are losing their life during pregnancy, and particularly in the weeks after giving birth. A real rise in those numbers, particularly compared to pre-pandemic. So we'll be taking a look at that. OK, see you both shortly. So, as I was saying, we now know that there are hundreds of wrongly convicted postmasters who are going to finally see justice. And with the public inquiry getting underway again this morning, attention is turning to those responsible for the scandal. Well, first, let's take you through the government's plan. The Prime Minister said that he plans to make sure that those convicted as part of the scandal will all be exonerated through an Act of Parliament. He added that anyone who has their conviction overturned will be given an upfront offer of at least £600,000 in compensation or be allowed to proceed with a detailed assessment process if they feel they should get more. Well, a separate offer of £75,000 is being made to those who were caught up in the scandal but not convicted. Well, for those wrongly convicted on the evidence of the faulty system, the news is life-changing.
It was very, very difficult. That day, it created such a rift in my family. My dad was a very proud businessman, and he felt what he was told, his son had dishonoured him and done something fraudulent, and word spread through the community. I mean, I was ousted. Myself and my wife, we left the house. We were kicked out of the house, literally.
What I would like is to see all of them exonerated. According to the lawyer, every single name read out and your sentences quashed. I believe in that because you don't want to go looking for a job or applying for a visa somewhere and it's still there.
Well, the public inquiry into the scandal, which started in 2020, resumes today, and it'll look into the original criminal investigations and examine who was responsible for failing to reveal the truth about the faulty computer system. The Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, has said that there are also powers in place to ensure that witnesses appear before the statutory inquiry into the Horizon scandal. So let's bring back in our political correspondent, Serena Barker-Singh. And Serena, the government was under a lot of pressure, wasn't it, to take action, and now it has.
Yes, and justice this week has come incredibly swiftly, proof that the government can respond to pressure and public will. Now, the Prime Minister yesterday announced this primary legislation, acknowledging that it was one of the biggest injustices in UK history, this whole post office scandal. But it's quite an extraordinary step to cut across the judicial process in this way, this blanket exonerations. Now, some legal minds are feeling slightly queasy over that this morning, but the Postal Minister yesterday said that these were exceptional circumstances. That's why that's what's warranted this move. Now, in terms of when the legislation's brought, we expect that to happen in a couple of weeks. And the aim is that the legislation unlocks this compensation. Some of it was already on the table, but not to those submasters whose convictions hadn't yet been overturned. So now they can access that £600,000 to start rebuilding their lives. But I think in terms of where we go next, the conversations will move to how this was allowed to happen in the first place, who is to blame. Now, on that, there is an inquiry ongoing. One of the most concerning things to come out is this allegation that investigators were offered cash bonuses for every submaster that was convicted. Now, that's obviously a very serious allegation, that there was some kind of incentive behind some of these prosecutions. That's come out in testimony that will have to be reviewed. But I think another thing that ministers will be looking and watching closely on in the inquiry is what Fujitsu knew. Now, they were the company behind the faulty Horizon system, and they still have a huge amount of government contracts still. So they say they're working fully with the inquiry and apologise for any suffering. But I think ministers and postmasters will be watching this, which is currently in its stage 4, and actually hearing some evidence today.
Yeah, they still want more answers, don't they? Serena, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. And just to let you know that to keep up to date with all the details on that inquiry, which is expected to resume at 10 o'clock this morning, you can follow our live blog on the Politics Hub part of the website by scanning the QR code that you can see on your screen now. And, of course, stick with us here, too, for updates. Now, the number of women dying during pregnancy or soon after childbirth has reached its highest level in 2 decades. Sky's Molly Malone is back to bring us more on this. Those are really shocking statistics. Tell us more about this report.
Yeah, they are. It's a research by an organisation called Embrace, which looks at trends in infant deaths and stillbirths, but also deaths during pregnancy in women that are losing their lives shortly after pregnancy, after giving birth. And I'll take you through some of the figures because, as you say, they are pretty stark and there has been quite a significant rise. The data suggests that there were 13 deaths per 100,000 pregnancies between January 2020 and December 2022. And then even with COVID deaths excluded, there's still a big rise on the figures from 3 years earlier when that number was 9 in 100,000 women. In terms of why this is happening, they point to the biggest cause being something called thrombosis, which is blood clotting in the veins. COVID, the second biggest cause, COVID-related deaths. They also point to mental health problems causing being a big factor here, and also heart disease. But importantly, there's big inequalities in who this is happening to. So black women, for example, are 3 times more likely to die than white women from complications during pregnancy. Asian women are twice as likely to die as white women too, and women living in deprived areas are more likely to be affected than women coming from wealthier or less deprived backgrounds. Now, all experts clearly agree that these are really concerning trends and concerning figures. The NHS England and the Department of Health say that there has been, over the last decade, massive investments into maternity care, but actually many of the experts do say that it's not just investment in maternity care, but actually that they point to a need to look at underlying structures. So before, during and after pregnancy, the need to look at housing and education in terms of women's access to that in order to improve their chances during pregnancy. But clearly they all agree this is a very concerning trend and lots needs to be done to change it.
Yeah, really worrying figures. OK, Molly, thanks very much indeed. Now, British and American forces are considering military action against Houthi rebels in Yemen after they defied a warning to stop attacking ships in the Red Sea. The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps hinted that Western countries could launch airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen. On Tuesday night, a British warship stopped a drone attack. Grant Shapps said yesterday that he has no doubt that Iran is behind the attacks and that enough is enough.
Saw this huge attack last night by the Houthi militants, but be in no doubt at all, Iran is guiding what is happening there in the Red Sea, providing them not just with equipment to carry out those attacks, but also often with the eyes and ears to allow those attacks to happen. Enough is enough, as far as we're concerned. So we must be clear with the Houthis that this has to stop. And that is my simple message to them today. And watch this space.
Well, Houthi rebels have been involved in a decade-long civil war, moving closer to Iran since ousting the Yemeni government in 2014. They now control large areas where the majority of the population live, as well as the strategically valuable Red Sea coast. Iran also backs Hamas, and since Israel's invasion of Gaza, Houthi rebels have supported the Palestinian militants by attacking shipping. Now, Israel is defending itself at the UN's highest court today against allegations of genocide. South Africa is asking the International Court of Justice to weigh in on Israel's military campaign in Gaza. Well, let's bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who's in The Hague for us this morning. And morning to you, Dominic. So tell us more about this case then.
Well, this is a very big moment for Israel and a moment, I think, of grave peril for the Jewish state because it is for the first time facing the charge of carrying out genocide, in this case being brought by South Africa, which I think is particularly offensive to many Israelis, particularly given the fact that Israel was founded in the aftermath of the biggest genocide in history. Now, South Africa believes that Israel was involved in genocidal actions and still is in Gaza. It has to be said that making a charge of genocide stick in a court of law is very, very difficult. South Africa is going to have to establish that Israel, the Israeli government, planned the eradication of all Palestinians in Gaza, or at least a substantial part of them, and then plotted a programme and issued explicit orders to achieve that. And to make that stick in a court is difficult and will probably take years. But I think that the more immediate jeopardy for Israel is not that. It's actually the possibility of a provisional ruling being issued by the International Court of Justice. And if South Africa make that happen, then orders could be issued against Israel, for instance, to announce a ceasefire in Gaza. For that to happen, the bar is much lower. South Africa will just have to prove that Israel plausibly, or a plausible case that Israel was involved in genocide in Gaza. And it's most likely going to try and join dots between the inflammatory rhetoric we've heard from people like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other ministers that South Africans say dehumanise Gazans. One minister even talked about nuking Gaza, joining dots between that and the fact that more than 22,000 Palestinian civilians and fighters have died, and 85% of Gazans have been forced out of their homes. Now, if they can achieve that, if a provisional ruling can be issued, then Israel could be forced to end its hostilities in Gaza, which would put it in a huge bind. And America too, its backer, because both countries believe that this war is vital to protect Israel against the threat of more attacks like October the 7th. Now, Israel could ignore the ruling, but then would face a UN Security Council hearing, which could lead to a resolution against Israel, and it would effectively become a pariah under international law. That is achievable, potentially, if the judges rule in favour of South Africa, and therefore it is a moment of grave jeopardy for the Jewish state.
OK, something you'll be watching all day, I know. Dominic, thanks very much indeed. Now, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie has withdrawn from the race for the Republican nomination in the US presidential election. But the Donald Trump ally turned critic vowed to never let him become US president again. Christie was trailing badly, with one poll showing his support at just 2%. Before announcing his decision, he was caught on a microphone saying another candidate, Nikki Haley, was going to get smoked by Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, look, she spent $68 million so far, just on TV. Spent $68 million so far, $59 million by DeSantis, and we spent 12. I mean, who's punching above their weight and who's getting a return on their investment, you know? And she's going to get smoked, and you and I both know it. She's not up to this.
Well, Donald Trump chose not to attend last night's Republican debate in Iowa, instead doing a town hall with Fox News, where he responded to Chris Christie withdrawing from the race and his hot mic moment.
Chris Christie was in, and he got a hot mic I heard about. I thought, actually, the bigger story wasn't the fact that he dropped out. Nobody cared too much about that. But he had a hot mic where he was talking to somebody about the weather, and he happened to say that she doesn't have what it takes. She'll be creamed in the election. And I mean, I know her very well, and I happen to believe that Chris Christie is right. That's one of the few things he's been right about, actually.
Let me just bring you some news just in. UK marine trade operations say that a vessel has been boarded by unauthorised persons off the coast of Oman. Now, this is in the Indian Ocean, not the Red Sea, and it's not an area where Houthi rebels are known to operate, but we will watch that very closely as more information emerges. That's news just in that we'll keep a close eye on for you. In the meantime, let's take a look at some of the day's other headlines now. And 11 people have been injured after 2 Russian missiles hit a hotel in Ukraine's largest city, Kharkiv. Local government said the strike, which involved S-300 missiles, happened at 10:30 p.m. local time. US and allies have accused Russia of violating UN sanctions by using North Korean weapons. The government is exploring plans for the largest nuclear power expansion in 70 years. They include a potential new power station and investing up to £300 million in production of the fuel currently only produced in Russia. The move hopes to create jobs, reduce bills and strengthen Britain's energy security. Social media users lost nearly £75 million to financial scams in 2022. That's almost double the losses that were reported in the previous year, according to data by the Good Money Guide website. The majority of those impacted were aged between 10 and 19, followed by users aged 70 to 99. Yorkshire County Cricket Club's board has agreed to recommend its members approve a financial deal that could lead to former chairman Colin Graves taking control again. Mr Graves presided over Yorkshire cricket during a period in which it admitted a charge of failing to address the systemic use of racist or discriminatory language. Now, the family of murder victim mistaken for Rupert Murdoch's wife offer a farmer £40,000 to let them dig up the land where they believe she was buried. Muriel McKay was kidnapped and murdered in 1969 by 2 brothers, one of whom has offered to show detectives the exact spot where they left her. Sky's crime correspondent Martin Brunt has more.
It's her family's latest desperate bid to find the remains of murder victim Muriel McKay. In a letter to a landowner, an extraordinary offer, £40,000 to let them dig for her body. They believe she was buried behind the farmhouse more than 50 years ago. Muriel McKay was kidnapped in 1969. 2 brothers, Arthur and Nizamuddin Hussain, were convicted of her murder, but her body was never found. Nizamuddin now says that Muriel died of a heart attack and they buried her at the farm. He's offered to show the family where.
But I still remember. I can still go to the spot.
The letter is asking for access, to pick my grandmother up. It's rather sad, really. For someone to come into your garden, do a bit of gardening, it's some money. It's a reasonable sum of money.
2 years ago, with the owner's permission, Scotland Yard excavated part of the farm and found nothing. The family say police dug in the wrong area. Detectives are reluctant to go back with a search warrant.
If the landowner rejects your offer, what's your next move?
It will probably end up in some kind of civil action, which would be unfortunate, costly, pointless.
Muriel's family say they will never give up their search. Martin Brunt, Sky News.
Let's take a quick look at the newspaper front pages now. The Metro leads with the headline, Justice by Special Delivery, after the Prime Minister's announcement of special legislation to exonerate wrongfully convicted sub-postmasters. Justice is also the word that features on the front of the Express. Here's the front of The Guardian, which says that hundreds of victims of the scandal will now have their convictions overturned. And it's the same story for the FT, which says the proposed law could be brought before Parliament within weeks. Well, let's find out a little bit more about the government's plans. The Energy Secretary, Claire Coutinho, joins me now. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about why the government made the decision it did about this new special legislation. The approach is that there'll be blanket exoneration for the victims of this post office scandal rather than expediting individual cases. Why did the government decide that was the right route?
Well, I think it's clear that what's happened here has been one of the largest miscarriages of justice in history. And what the government's decided is that it's really important that we serve justice quickly for people, which is why we are taking an extraordinary step to make sure that all postmasters are exonerated.
And with MPs unanimously behind this bill, how soon will it be passed?
Well, obviously, we need to write the legislation, but we have said that we want to bring it forward in a matter of weeks, and we'll be bringing forward it as the quickest pace that we can.
This is the first time in modern British history that the Parliament is to write a law that will overturn the verdicts of judges. Does that challenge the notion of an independent court system and judiciary? Does that concern you at all?
Well, what we've seen is an extraordinary scandal, and I do think it requires extraordinary steps, which is why we have taken the big decision, as you say, to make sure that we are bringing forward legislation which can serve justice quickly.
But is it a worrying precedent?
I think it's really important that we respond to what is in front of us. And actually, as you said, lots of people do agree that this is really important to make sure that postmasters who have been through so much can get their justice quickly as possible.
And I'm sure a lot of people will support that. But are you worried at all that there may be guilty people who are also exonerated under this blanket move?
Well, look, as we always say, there's no solutions in life, there's only trade-offs. And we've been very clear that there is a risk that some people, a small amount of people, will be wrongfully exonerated. But if you look on balance, there's a huge amount of people here who've been through extraordinarily difficult times, and we think it is the right thing to do to make sure that we can exonerate those who've been wrongfully convicted as quickly as possible.
Well, yes, and some of those victims say they want to be individually exonerated in court. They say they were individually prosecuted and sentenced in court. They want to have their moment once again where they are told, you are innocent. They say they don't really have justice under this blanket exoneration, which may catch a few people who actually were guilty.
I think the vast majority of people, especially ones who've been through court cases, just want to get a speedy redress for everything that they have suffered. And that's been at the forefront of our mind. But whether it comes to compensation or anything else, of course, we're working with people to see what more we can do to make sure that they get the justice that they feel that they need. But I do think, considering the circumstances, acting swiftly is the most important thing.
Well, yes, and most people will have access to £600,000 if they sign this confirmation that they are not guilty. However, there are people that will have access to £75,000, including those who are part of the 555 group, the people that went to the High Court, had the bravery to take action and won in 2019, but many of them are still out of pocket. I mean, is £75,000 really enough for those people?
Well, what we tried to do with the compensation schemes is set out amounts which people can get quickly, so those are fixed sum payments, but they will also be able to go forward and seek further compensation if that's what they prefer to do. But we want to have an option for people who would like to get compensation quickly.
But how soon can you say that the government will make sure that there is no one out of pocket? When will that time come?
Well, so what we try to do, as I say, is set out two paths. For people who want a quick compensation scheme, we've set out the plans, as you say, for £75,000 for people who are part of the GLO group, £600,000 for others. But if they would like to get further compensation and they would like an individual assessment, we'll be taking those things forward as well. And
when might that happen? How soon could they get their money if they want more?
Well, it depends how complicated their cases are, but we'll be taking those forward as quickly as possible. And we are continuing to work with the Independent Advisory Board to see what we can do to speed up that process.
And will all this money be taxpayers' money, or would you like to see Fujitsu, who is behind the faulty Horizon software, contributing at all or paying out?
Well, I'd like to see whoever is at fault contribute, and that's exactly why we set up an independent inquiry. That will report back, and once we've got clear evidence on who's accountable, I think it's really important that they contribute.
Evidence that's been heard at the inquiry is being highlighted today, saying that Post Office investigators were offered cash bonuses for every sub-postmaster who was convicted. What's your reaction to that?
Well, again, I think it's really important that the independent inquiry looks at everything and everyone that's at fault, and then we can make sure that there's redress at the end of it.
Is the government doing anything separate to the public inquiry to try to establish the facts on this?
Well, like we said, we set up the independent inquiry process. I don't think it's right to have a separate process that competes with it. We've decided to do an independent inquiry. We've given them the ability to do that. But it's really important they gather the facts. And then once we have those facts, we'll be looking at that.
Why did it take an ITV drama to propel the government into action?
Well, I don't think that's the case at all. If you look at the...
Would it have happened without that drama?
Well, the conversations about some of the schemes that we have set out were taking place before the TV programme was aired. If you look at the minister involved, Kevin Hollinrake, who's been doing this for a number of years, it's really important to acknowledge that not only did we set up the inquiry, but we've already been paying out compensation. So 65% of people have had their full compensation awarded, and we have been taking action.
Seriously, though, if the drama hadn't aired, would we have had emergency legislation this week?
Well, like I said, the conversations about some of the solutions that we've put forward were happening before the TV programme was aired, and the minister involved has been working very diligently on this. And it's not the case that ministers haven't been doing work. It's also the case that journalists and others have been focused on this area. I'm aware that it's now captured public imagination, and that is right, but it's also the case that people have been working on this for a number of years.
Very quick question about your nuclear announcement that you're making today. So tell us what exactly you're proposing.
So we are setting out plans to have the biggest expansion of nuclear power in 70 years. And the reason that's important is that nuclear can provide a really stable and reliable energy source for the future, which will not only give us clean energy, but will also bring down the costs of the system overall. So this is an unprecedented package. We've set out plans to build more nuclear in the next 3 decades than we have in the last 7 combined, and it will be a really positive story for the country.
Labour says you've been dragging your feet. They say Ed Miliband had approved 10 potential power station sites when he was Energy Secretary back in 2008 to 2010. If it's such a good idea, why has it taken so long?
Well, let me be clear. Labour, in their entire time in office, signed up no investment decisions on nuclear. In fact, I think Tony Blair said it was an unattractive option in 2003, and if they'd been building nuclear, we'd have more now. Whereas compared to that, we have been backing nuclear. We set up Great British Nuclear last year. We're not only looking at the large-scale projects with which we're taking some forward, but we're also looking at new technologies like small modular reactors and also advanced nuclear fuel, a really important thing for our energy security and also for the future, and making sure that we're backing all of those things. And that's why the work that we've done today has been backed by industry and others as well.
OK, Claire Coutinho, thanks very much indeed for your time this morning. Thank you. Let's take a look now at what the weather's doing.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the next few days look mostly quiet and cold, with a stiff breeze bringing a significant wind chill to many. Southern and northwestern Britain and the west of Ireland are fairly clear but frosty now, while central and northeastern parts are a bit milder under cloudy skies. And there are some light showers there. Central Britain will stay mostly cloudy this morning, with patchy, drizzly outbreaks tending to die away, while Ireland and northern and central Scotland will see the cloud breaking.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now then, could this be the car of the future? It's a flying car. It's been unveiled at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. At the flick of a button, it transforms into a helicopter, which could be quite handy to beat the traffic. Do stay with us. We've got lots coming up for you, including... Find out how seals in the Antarctic are dying of bird flu. Also ahead, we're going to be speaking to legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg for his take on the government's decision to quash convictions in response to the Post Office scandal.
Breakfast is becoming even brighter here on Sky News. There's a new studio, a new start time of 6 a.m. and some new faces.
OK, yes, we'll bring you all the top stories from around the globe.
And here in Westminster as we count down to an election.
Plus a look ahead to the stories that'll be making headlines on Sky News throughout the day.
That's your new look breakfast show, weekdays 6 to 10 a.m. here on Sky News.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing. My most memorable story was covering the extreme zero COVID restrictions.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city. but officially, almost no one has died.
This is a 4-lane dual carriageway, completely shut off. Some things are being allowed in, but actually the only thing we've seen coming out is an ambulance. The message from China is clear. This is a modernised military, absolutely able to fight an international war if needed. Is this military ready?
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to. By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets.
To the left, to the left!
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made. It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
There are people who are afraid.
On the streets of Xinjiang, there is still a tension. Heavy police, a sense they're always watching.
It's really an incredible eeriness to this place, and it just is completely abandoned. The Chinese housing market, for so long a driver of growth, is now a real liability. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's actually hard to describe the cold here. It's so intense. It literally takes your breath away.
I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling.
The world is watching what's happening here.
Watching Sky News Breakfast. A reminder of our top stories here this morning. And the public inquiry into the Horizon scandal gets underway again today. Post Office investigators were given cash bonuses for successful convictions. The number of women dying during pregnancy or soon after childbirth has reached its highest level in 20 years. The report also identified clear examples of maternity services under immense pressure. Israel is defending itself at the International Court of Justice today as South Africa claims that Israel's war with Hamas amounts to genocide against Palestinians. Well, let's get more on our top story as the public inquiry into the Horizon Post Office scandal continues. Let's speak to our legal commentator, Joshua Rosenberg, who's here with me now. Joshua, nice to see you. Thanks for coming in. The government has introduced emergency legislation to try to exonerate post office sub-postmasters and also compensate them as well. So what exactly does this bill do? What does it mean for those people?
We haven't seen the wording of the bill, but from what the government said, this will mean that everybody who was involved in a post office and who was convicted on the evidence of the Horizon computer system will be cleared automatically. And the problem that lawyers are concerned about, including one or two in Parliament, is that it's not just the innocent people who are going to be cleared. There are a few, and nobody knows how many there are, and nobody knows quite who they were, but who were guilty of offences of dishonesty, and they're going to be swept along with this blanket exoneration, and provided they're willing to sign a declaration which says that they didn't do anything wrong, well, they'll get compensation as well.
But presumably the government's argument is we need this to happen swiftly and we want as many people to get that exoneration as fast as possible.
That's exactly right. And the government, Kevin Hollinrake, the Post Office Minister, accepts that it's facing a dilemma, but it's better, they say, that everybody gets cleared quickly and gets compensation, even if this does mean a few people are going to be swept into the net who really shouldn't be there.
And there are different levels of compensation, aren't there? If you sign this declaration, you know, confirming that you're innocent, you get access to the £600,000 compensation, but there's a different level for the people who took the case to the High Court in 2019 and won. Why is that? Why are there different levels of compensation there?
£75,000 if you were caught up in this but not prosecuted, not convicted. £600,000 minimum if you were wrongly convicted, maybe sent to prison, and possibly more if you wish to challenge the sum on offer and say that you deserve more. But the £600,000 is the standard payment on offer to people who were wrongly convicted.
And how controversial a move is it to have a law that essentially says that government won't listen to what the judges had to say about the matter and override their decisions? Is that seen as controversial by the judiciary?
I think it's seen as controversial by the government. And I think the Lord Chancellor, Alex Chalk, went to some lengths to clear this with the senior judiciary earlier this week and warn them what they were doing. I think, in fact, the judges are not as worried as the government thinks, because the judges faithfully implement laws passed by Parliament. And if this bill is passed by Parliament, and it's clear it will be because it has all-party support, well, they'll give it effect. What the judges would not do is change the way in which they handle miscarriages of justice. They're not going to clear everybody just because the government says that they want the judges to change the rules. But if Parliament passes legislation saying these people are going to be cleared without going to court, well, the judges will go along with that.
Well, yes, but does it challenge the notion of an independent court system? Does it set a precedent of any kind, do you think? Not
a legal precedent, but it is worrying because, you know, we're used to US presidents clearing their friends just before they leave office, free pardons to everybody. People are worried about it. I don't think we're going to see anything quite like this again, but, you know, there is a policy which says never do anything for the first time, and that's just what the government's doing.
There will be a lot of people that will be surprised that the majority of the cases in this whole scandal were brought by the Post Office themselves and not the Crown Prosecution Service. What are the rules about large companies taking prosecutions, and are they likely to change?
The Post Office has been prosecuting people for hundreds of years. In fact, before we had a Director of Public Prosecutions and long before we had a Crown Prosecution Service, anybody could bring a private prosecution, and they still do. And some companies prosecute people for shoplifting. The RSPCA famously used to prosecute people. Now, I think people are realising that's a bad idea. The Post Office stopped doing this in 2015. But theoretically, anybody can bring the criminal law to bear. But I think this does show everybody that if you're investigating and prosecuting people who you employed, this is unsatisfactory, and you really need an independent system, which is what the Crown Prosecution Service is.
And in the meantime, now that this legislation has been announced, how long might it take to become law and for these people to be exonerated and get their money? What's the time frame look like?
The government's certainly expecting it'll be a few weeks before the bill is ready, because you're going to have to draft it. Now, how do you define the people who are covered by it? Are you going to say everybody who worked for the Post Office who was convicted since Horizon came in? Maybe there'll have to be a list signed off by a minister. That sort of thing has to be worked out. So you really need to know who's coming within the net, and that takes some effort to define. But once that's challenged, once that's defined, then it may be challenged in Parliament, just in terms of what it covers and how well it's drafted. But ultimately, it will go through, and the government's hoping that this will all be sorted out by the end of the year.
OK, well, Joshua, always really good to get your analysis of these things. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, some news just in. UK marine trade operations are saying that a vessel has been boarded by unauthorised persons off the coast of Oman. Now, this is in the Gulf of Oman. It's not in the Red Sea and is not an area where Houthi rebels are known to operate. Well, here with me now is Defence and Security Analyst Michael Clark. And Michael, as I was reading that, it may be the first you've heard of it, but I wondered if you do have any reaction to this news that a vessel has been boarded by unauthorised personnel in the Gulf of Oman.
Yeah, I was looking at it about 5 minutes ago, Anna. This has come from the UK Maritime Operations Centre, which is just opposite where we are, actually, in the studio. It's on like the International Maritime Organisation on the south bank of the Thames. It's a common occurrence. I mean, this is not in the Red Sea. This is not the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, which we're all thinking about at the moment. This is a bit further round in the Gulf of Oman. But piracy is absolutely relevant in that area. It happens all the time. And one of the boardings last November that originally was thought to be the Houthis turned out to be local pirates. So we don't know. It's not an area where the Houthis have operated recently in the Gulf of Oman. They've concentrated on the southern end of the Red Sea. My guess would be this is just unauthorised personnel. We don't know what the ship is. It's just that a ship has, as it were, gone off the plot, and nobody can communicate with it, and there's some element of boarding. This report has also come from the Times of Israel at the moment. Nobody knows anything else. So it's not unusual. My guess would be, until we know anything more, it's probably local piracy. There's a great deal of it, but we'll see.
OK, yeah, we'll keep an eye on that story. In the meantime, you say a lot of focus on the Red Sea. The reason being for these attacks by Houthi rebels on ships passing through. And we heard yesterday from the Defence Secretary that UK and US naval forces had repelled the biggest attack to date. Grant Shapps has said enough is enough. We heard from the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken yesterday saying that if the attacks continue, there will be consequences. So what does that mean? Yeah, and it was serious stuff. I mean, HMS Diamond is one of 3 or 4 ships that were involved in the attack. They brought down 7 drones, and one of them, they even had to use their Oerlikon cannon, the 30mm cannon. So they're using Sea Viper missile, but one of them got close enough that they had to fire at it with a cannon. So this is real wartime stuff, which has obviously provoked Grant Shapps and the Ministry of Defence to say, look, we can't live with this forever, because eventually, if the Houthis keep launching attacks like this, sooner or later something will get through. We will be overwhelmed. And we may run out of ammunition. I mean, these Sea Viper missiles cost £1 million a shot against a drone that costs $20,000. So do you think retaliation or some kind of military action is entirely plausible? Yeah. I mean, we wondered if it would happen overnight. It hasn't, and there haven't been any more attacks that we know of so far. But I don't think that Britain and America will leave it too much longer. It may be that they'll see, if there are no more attacks in the next 24, 48 hours, they'll just stand back. But having issued such a strong warning, and having that warning, as it were, completely ignored by the Houthis yesterday, I think the presumption must be that some sort of military action is certainly planned. Whether they'll give the go-ahead or not, we'll see. And if it happens, it will probably be attacks on some areas of the coast in Yemen where the Houthis operate, maybe some of their systems, some of their storage bases, if we know exactly where they are. Or it might be a series of demonstration attacks to show that we can do a lot more if you don't desist. It will be difficult, though, because the Houthis they're not militarily stupid, and they've got quite a lot of equipment. They're a fairly modern army because they've got all the stuff that they captured. And could it risk escalation in the region? It could, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the things we don't want to see. And the Houthis, at the moment, they've seized this opportunity to look as if they are the only element which are actively supporting Hamas in Gaza. That they've made themselves into the anti-Israel front, the axis of resistance, as the Iranians call it. And although the Iranians, in a sense, are directing the Houthis also have quite a lot of autonomy, and they're gaining throughout the Arab world a certain amount of credit for attacking what they claim is Israeli shipping. They're not. They're attacking all shipping, but they're saying to everybody in the Arab world, we're only attacking Israeli shipping, which is completely untrue. But a lot of people in the Arab world believe that, and whether they dislike the Houthis or not, are privately quite glad that they're doing it. So if Britain and America and the other members of the coalition launch attacks on the Houthis, there is every possibility that it will increase the tension in the general atmosphere of this crisis. The best way is still to pressurise Iran, to lean on the Houthis to stop doing it. But even if the Iranians do that, it's not clear that it will stop. OK, well, it's definitely one to watch, isn't it? Michael Clark, thanks very much indeed for talking us through it. We appreciate it. Thank you. Do stay with us. Coming up, we're going to hear from a sub-postmaster who considered ending it all when he was falsely accused of stealing from his own branch. That's coming up.
Morning, everybody. It is 8 o'clock. You're very welcome to join us on Sky News wherever you're watching us. Chancellor will be joining us in just a few moments' time.
Evidence of the cost of living crisis.
And we'll start with breaking news.
There's only one place to start this morning.
Against the dollar ever.
It was like night fell.
It's 5 o'clock. This is the News Hour. I'm Mark Austin. Coming up in the next 60 minutes.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
On the UK Tonight throughout the course of the week. Still to come.
Well, what happened was I had the nuts in the box, and the nuts was disappearing, first of all. So I thought, where's these nuts going? So I went into my cupboard I got out in the shed and went into the bottom drawer there. And in there I got an old pair of shoes, and it was full of nuts. So the mouse had taken them from the box and put them in the old shoes. So I thought, that's a bit odd, that. So the next thing happened was I had the nuts in there, and then I went in the next morning and there was some items put in the box. So I thought I'm going to set up a night camera, a trail camera, and that's what I done. And this is what I captured. As you can see, what's on there now. The mouse was putting all the items, well, most of them, into the box on top of the nuts.
You couldn't believe what you were seeing, because the mouse is doing this in pitch black and is very meticulous at tidying.
That's what I mean, yeah. It's because this is infrared film, so it's not light like this, obviously. It's pitch black. Putting that stick on there is amazing, yeah.
So since you've recorded this, have you been leaving things out for the mouse to tidy up, hoping it will come back? What's been happening since?
Well, it comes back every night. It's probably out there now.
Please tell me you leave out a little treat for doing all this hard work for you. No. You're quite messy, Rodney.
No, not yet, I haven't.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
Now, the public inquiry into the Post Office scandal resumes this morning. Hundreds of innocent postmasters will be exonerated and receive compensation under new legislation, which Rishi Sunak said he hopes to introduce in the next few weeks. Well, with me now is Mark Kelly, who ran the Brondeg, you'll have to correct my pronunciation probably there, post office in Swansea, and was falsely accused of stealing from his own branch. Very good morning to you, Mark. Thanks so much for coming in.
Hello, Anna.
And you brought Gizmo with you, your dog, who helps keep you calm after everything that you've been through.
Yeah.
So talk us through your story. What did happen to you?
Well, we took over my parents' post office in the year 2003 because they had some losses themselves before that. But we thought my mum was getting confused with the computer because she was not good at computers. So I got a computer science background. My wife and I just got married, so we thought we'd take over the house, the post office, and keep it open for the community. We had 2 armed robberies in 2003 and 2004. The post office tried to hold us liable for the 2 losses, like on the drama on the 3rd episode. But on the second robbery, on the 2004, after the post office did an audit and the police did an audit as well, the system generated the following day a minus £2,000 shortfall, which I thought was quite unusual. So in about 2 years later, I've been looking into it after that, and I found a problem in Horizon, and it generated losses, the bug on it. I told the post office about the bug and presented it to them, and they were not interested. And then I started to get a lot of problems, had losses generated in my office and errors, and come July I had a surprise audit and I had like a £13,000 shortfall. And they then were going to charge me with false accounting and theft. In August, I had like a breakdown when they were trying to interview me. They wanted to carry on, but my solicitor said you can't be interviewed in that state. Then come January, my solicitor said that if you proceed, we will present this document to the court, and that's what was left then.
And you obviously, it hit you very badly mentally, didn't it? You had a really tough time.
Yeah, I suffered from anxiety, depression, and PTSD from like the armed robberies and stuff. And fast forward to 2010, when I started to hear about all the other postmasters, like Martin Griffin, who committed suicide, I started to blame myself from it. So I started to become suicidal, thinking that if I went to court with the error, that it might have stopped it. But fast forward to 2019, I don't believe that anymore because of the High Court. I think that...
You were part of the group that went to the High Court, won your case, demonstrating that there was a problem with the system. Yeah. And have things improved since then for you?
Mentally, yes. I don't blame myself for it anymore. And we as a group talk to each other and support each other. And I do think things are moving on, but it's not going in the right direction in certain circumstances.
OK, so tell us a little bit about that, because we had this big announcement yesterday from the government saying they're bringing in this emergency legislation which will exonerate everybody in a kind of blanket move. How do you feel about that? Do you welcome it?
On the over-conviction part, I do welcome it. I think it's a unique situation, so I think it needs a unique solution. But the bit I'm wary about is the fact they want people to sign that innocent form, because that still will give the impression there's people who are guilty. So people might say, oh, is he actually guilty or is he innocent? And the Horizon evidence is so unreliable, I would say everyone is innocent.
So you're uncomfortable about the fact they have to sign this this form in order to receive compensation?
Yeah, I don't have to do that because I'm in that.
You were part of the other group, weren't you? Because you went to the High Court. So that means that you have access to £75,000 compensation, is that right?
The £75,000 is, from what I gathered, is that you can have it, it's a full and final settlement, or if you think your claim is worth more, you can do a full assessment and it might take a year or so, but you get then...
So how do you feel about that? Does that feel adequate to you?
I think that £75,000 should be more of an intimate payment. Reason is because most of the people in that GOL group that don't have the convictions are more complex cases now. They had, they lost houses, they lost their business, have mental illnesses, not been working, etc. So it's going to be a lot more than £75,000.
Well, Mark Kelly, we really appreciate you coming in and giving your reaction to the developments this week and for bringing Gizmo with you as well. And we wish you well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if you've been affected at all by anything that we've discussed there, do remember you can contact the Samaritans helpline on 116 123. Let's check on the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the next few days look mostly quiet and cold, with a stiff breeze bringing a significant wind chill to many. Southern and northwestern Britain and the west of Ireland are fairly clear but frosty now, while central and northeastern parts are a bit milder under cloudy skies.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, the Antarctic seal is the latest species to be hit by bird flu. Scientists think the virus was probably introduced by birds migrating to the sub-Antarctic from South America. Scientists have been testing animals on the island of South Georgia after several birds were found dead back in October. It's the region's first case of infected mammals, as our science correspondent Thomas Moore reports.
The giants of Antarctica have fallen to bird flu. Dozens of elephant seals are known to have died on the sub-Antarctic island of South Georgia. Many others will have succumbed out to sea or in remote bays. Now, scientists from the UK's Animal and Plant Health Agency have confirmed a deadly form of the H5N1 virus has been detected in dead elephant and fur seals, as well as seabirds. The species live together on crowded beaches.
At the moment, there's no evidence of mammal-to-mammal spread within the seal populations, and we think that it's environmental contamination and the interactions in these complex ecosystems that's driving the exchange of virus between these creatures.
The variant of the virus has been spread around the world by migrating birds. It was detected in seabirds in the Antarctic region last October and now mammals, but there's no sign the virus has mutated to thrive in seals.
Every time the virus spills over from birds into mammals, there is concern because it increases the chances of it undergoing genetic changes that help it to adapt. But so far, there's no good evidence that it has, and the risk to human health is still very low.
Wildlife experts describe the deaths in seals and birds as a mass mortality event. So far, penguins have been unaffected, but all bets are off if it reaches the Antarctic continent.
That would affect global population of emperor penguins, a very large proportion of the world's Adelie penguins as well. And there's several species of ice seal down there, so leopard, crab-eater and Weddell seals that could be infected. So yeah, these are all species that really aren't found anywhere else, so this would have global repercussions on Antarctic wildlife.
Bird flu is a deadly new threat in an ecosystem already reeling from climate change. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
You're watching Sky News Breakfast. We've got lots coming up in the next hour. More reaction to that emergency legislation to exonerate victims of the post office scandal. That's coming up. Hello everyone, it's 8 o'clock. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Vindication for postmasters. The government will introduce emergency laws to quash hundreds of false convictions. And this morning, the public inquiry resumes with pressure mounting for those responsible for the scandal to be held to account. It's Thursday, the 11th of January. The Energy Secretary tells this programme those at fault should pay up.
I'd like to see whoever is at fault contribute, and that's exactly why we set up an independent inquiry that will report back. And once we've got clear evidence on who's accountable, I think it's really important that they contribute.
Also ahead, the number of women who die during pregnancy has risen to its highest level in 20 years. The International Court of Justice considers whether Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. The family of a murder victim mistaken for Rupert Murdoch's wife offer a farmer £40,000 to let them dig up the land where they believe she was buried. And could this be the car of the future? A flying car is unveiled at the CES Tech Summit in Las Vegas. Hello, very good morning. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Lots to talk about this morning. Let's bring in Serena and Molly straight away. And Serena, you're looking at the latest on the post office scandal and what the government's doing about it.
Yes, exactly. And now that the victims are closer to accessing that compensation, I think conversations are moving to why this happened in the first place and who's to blame.
Absolutely. So more on that from you in a moment. And Molly, you're looking at maternity care.
Yeah, and the rise of the number of women that are dying as a result of their pregnancy or soon after they give birth, a number that's really on the rise, not as you'd expect, perhaps coming down as our health systems become more advanced.
Yeah, some really shocking figures there. More from you in a moment, Molly and Serena. In the meantime, though, so now we know that hundreds of wrongly convicted postmasters will finally see justice. And with the public inquiry getting underway again this morning, attention is turning to those responsible for the scandal. Well, first, let's take you through the government's plan. The Prime Minister said he plans to make sure that those convicted as part of the scandal will all be exonerated through an Act of Parliament. He added that anyone who has their conviction overturned will be given an upfront offer of at least £600,000 in compensation, or allowed to proceed with a detailed assessment process if they feel they should get more. A separate offer of £75,000 is being made to those who were caught up in the scandal but not convicted. Well, for those wrongly convicted on the evidence of the faulty system, the news is life-changing. But one former sub-postmaster told this programme a few minutes ago that he still had concerns.
The bit I'm wary about is the fact they want people to sign that innocent form, because that still will give the impression there's people who are guilty. So people might say, oh, is he actually guilty or is he innocent? And the horizon evidence is so unreliable, I would say everyone is innocent.
Well, the public inquiry into the scandal, which started in 2020, resumes today, and it will look into the original criminal investigations and examine who was responsible for failing to reveal the truth about the faulty computer system. The Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, has said there are also powers in place to ensure that witnesses appear before the statutory inquiry into the Horizon scandal. Well, let's bring in our political correspondent, Serena Barker-Singh, once again then. And Serena, there was a huge amount of pressure building up on the government to do something about this, especially in the wake of the ITV drama, wasn't there? So remind us what's been announced, but also what the reaction's been to it.
Yes, justice has come incredibly quickly this week after decades of injustice for all of those postmasters. Now, the Prime Minister has announced this primary legislation, as you say, and it would overturn convictions of hundreds of postmasters who were wrongly convicted based on that faulty Horizon system. Now, we're not sure when it's coming, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, but endorsing these kind of blanket bans is an extraordinary step to cut across the sort of judicial process like this. And some legal minds are feeling quite queasy about that this morning. But speaking to Claire Coutinho this morning, I think that was interesting. She was saying there are no solutions in life, only trade-offs. So it's clear the government have thought about this. And Kevin Hollinrate yesterday in the Commons said that these were exceptional circumstances, and that's why they've made this significant move. Now, as you say, the conversations are moving towards how this was allowed to happen in the first place, who was at fault, and the inquiry, the ongoing inquiry, will address that. One of the most concerning things to come out of that so far, though, was this allegation that Post Office investigators were offered cash bonuses for every submaster convicted during the Horizon scandal. Now, that's a serious allegation, and if there was some kind of incentive behind these prosecutions, that is very serious. That will have to be reviewed. I think ministers will be watching closely too. Claire Coutinho, again, gave us a flavour of that. She said whoever is at fault should contribute. So hints that Fujitsu, who was in charge of this Horizon system, if they're found to know about the problems, they could be liable for some costs. Now, they say they're fully cooperating with the inquiry, which is in the stage 4 at the moment and is sitting today. So we'll hear some more about that today.
OK, Serena, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. And to keep up to date with all the details of the inquiry, which is expected to resume at 10 o'clock this morning, you can follow our live blogging on the Politics Hub part of the website by scanning the QR code that you can see on screen right now. And, of course, do stick with us here, too, for updates. Now, the number of women dying during pregnancy or soon after childbirth has reached its highest level in 2 decades. Sky's Molly Malone is here with more. So this has come about from a report that's been pulled together. So what are the details of it? What does it tell us?
Yeah, so this report, this data comes from an organisation called Embrace, who study these trends, the number of women that are dying during their pregnancy or soon after giving birth, 6 weeks or so after giving birth. The figures are quite shocking in that they're on the rise rather than coming down, which you might expect as, you know, the NHS, the health system, maternity care in theory becomes more advanced. But let me talk you through some of them. So the data suggests there were 13 deaths per 100,000 pregnancies between January 2020 and December 2022. And even with COVID deaths excluded, there's still a big rise on the figures from 3 years earlier when that number was 9 in every 100,000. Now, to the viewer at home, that doesn't necessarily seem like a massive figure, but the point is, as I said, they're on the rise rather than coming down. Now, in terms of why this is happening, the main cause was thrombosis, which is blood clotting in the veins. COVID's a big part of it too, so it's the second biggest cause. But even, as I said, after you account for COVID deaths, the numbers are still getting bigger rather than coming down. Other factors include heart disease and poor mental health, and some of the experts do point to trends in the UK and women suffering from heart disease compared to other kind of developed nations. Now, there's some pretty stark inequalities as well. The number of black women, for example, you're 3 times more likely to die if you're a black woman during pregnancy than you are if you're a white woman. The same with Asian women, twice as likely to die as a white woman. And women living in the most deprived areas are more likely to die than those living in less deprived areas. And actually, that's something that these experts are pointing to. They say, while clearly we need improvements in maternity care, there's some underlying structures. So access to education, access to healthcare for women that are potentially living in more deprived areas compared to those that are not. So NHS England, the Department for Health say that they've invested over the last decade in maternity services, but they do recognise there's a lot further to go in terms of changing what is quite an alarming trend.
Yeah, really important issue. Molly, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, Israel is defending itself at the UN's highest court today against allegations of genocide. South Africa is asking the International Court of Justice to weigh in on Israel's military campaign in Gaza. So let's find out more about this. We can bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who's in The Hague for us this morning. So, Dominic, tell us more then about this case.
Well, this is a big day for Israel, and it's, I think, a moment of danger for the Jewish state, which, of course, was founded in the aftermath of the biggest genocide in history, the Holocaust. And it is now going to be in court defending itself against allegations brought by South Africa that it is engaged in genocide itself in Gaza. It has to be said that making a charge of genocide stick in a court of law is very difficult. It's a very high bar, and South Africa will have to establish that the Israeli government itself plotted genocide, planned the eradication of at least a substantial part of Palestinians in Gaza, and then issued explicit commands to make that happen, and that is going to be difficult and is going to take years potentially in the International Court of Justice. I think the more pressing danger for Israel is a more immediate one. That is the possibility of a provisional ruling made by the ICJ, and for that to happen, the bar is much lower. South Africa will just have to prove there is a plausible case. There's a possibility that that Israel was involved and is involved in genocidal actions in Gaza, and I think it's expected, its legal team is expected to try and join the dots between the inflammatory rhetoric made by people as high as Benjamin Netanyahu in the Israeli government, all the way down to a more junior minister who talked about nuking Gaza. Between that and also the fact that Israel restricted supplies of things like water, food, medical supplies and power in Gaza, connect all that with the fact that more than 22,000 Palestinians have died in the war, 85% of Gazans have been forced out of their homes, and to make the case that there is a plausible case that Israel was involved and is involved in genocide in Gaza. And if the judges are persuaded of that, then fairly early on in this hearing, in this process, the court can issue an order. Then that could be ordering Israel to declare a ceasefire in Gaza, which would put Israel in a bind because it could ignore that. But if it did ignore that, then the case would go to the UN Security Council. And if America chose not to wield its veto, which it may feel it would be difficult to do in the circumstances, then Israel would be forced either to declare a ceasefire in a war it believes is absolutely essential for its own survival against Hamas, or to risk becoming an international pariah. Now, Israelis will say that this case is politically motivated. They believe that South Africans are trying to distract possibly from an election coming up. They know that the ANC, the ruling party in South Africa, has always been very close with the PLO, one of the factions in Palestinian society. They will also worry, I think, that judges like Russia and China on the panel are not entirely independent and could be politically motivated as well. Now, that is possibly true, but none of that will distract from the possibility of this provisional hearing, which I think will be very difficult for Israel, and that's why this is a dangerous case, a dangerous moment for Israel as it faces these charges in the International Court of Justice here in The Hague.
OK, Dominic, I know you're going to be following that very closely today. For the moment, thanks very much indeed. Now, British and American forces are considering military action against Houthi rebels in Yemen after they defied a warning to stop attacking ships in the Red Sea. The Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, hinted that Western countries could launch airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen. On Tuesday night, a British warship stopped a drone attack. Grant Shapps said yesterday he has no doubt that Iran is behind the attacks and that enough is enough.
Saw this huge attack last night by the Houthi militants, but be in no doubt at all, Iran is guiding what is happening there in the Red Sea, providing them not just with equipment to carry out those attacks, but also often with the eyes and ears to allow those attacks to happen. Enough is enough, as far as we're concerned. So we must be clear with the Houthis that this has to stop. And that is my simple message to them today, and watch this space.
Well, let's bring in our defence and security analyst, Michael Clark. So Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, in light of these attacks, saying enough is enough. Also, a warning from the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, saying if there are more attacks, there would be consequences. So what do you think they're considering?
Yeah, well, we know they're considering military action, but I think they're considering a wider range of things as well. So there's a lot more diplomatic activity, leaning on Tehran to lean on the Houthis to stop doing this, because the Houthis are trained by the Republican Guard, the Iranian Republican Guard Corps. They're using Iranian missiles, and the Iranians are providing them with surveillance. It's generally believed there's an Iranian ship there, which looks as if it's just an innocent cargo ship. It's actually a surveillance ship, and it's giving them intelligence on the shipping movements. And so there'll be a lot of diplomatic activity, but undoubtedly the threat is there that we will attack the shore bases that the Yemenis, the Houthis are using in Yemen, if necessary. Now, how many of those shore bases they could attack and how effective they could be would be a big issue, and it will rely on the intelligence that the Western powers have got as to where the Houthis keep their material and how they store their missiles and so on. But on the other hand, I mean, Western intelligence on Houthi dispositions is, generally speaking, has been quite good in the past, and British intelligence on Yemen has always been quite good in the past. So I think they would have a reasonable picture. Question is, if they launch some military attacks, in what respect does that escalate the tension in the whole crisis?
And what's the answer to that question?
It undoubtedly would. I mean, it raises the political temperature. But not acting is also going to raise the temperature, because having issued a very clear warning last week on the 3rd of January that consequences will follow if these attacks don't stop. And this is very bad for world trade, the fact that these attacks are taking place. If nothing is done and the Houthis continue with these attacks, then, in a sense, the credibility of Western power in the Gulf will take a big hit, and it'll happen more and more. And so, just as with piracy off the Somali coast a few years ago, it got to a point where the West did act, and it more or less solved the problem or reduced it. In this case, the Houthi behaviour in closing the straits at the southern tip of the Red Sea has been so overt and so deliberate that if no action is taken, or if it doesn't stop, then world trade will suffer, and indeed everything will get worse in the Middle East in general.
And in the meantime, we've also had news this morning that a vessel has been boarded in the Gulf of Oman by unauthorised personnel. Yeah. What are you hearing about that, and what could that mean? That's not in the Red Sea.
No, it's some way away from the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is what we're talking about in the foot of the Red Sea, the southern tip. This is in the Gulf of Oman. It's 50 miles off the coast. All we know so far is that a vessel has disappeared from the record, as it were, and some report that it has been boarded by persons unknown. Now, there's a lot of piracy in the Gulf of Oman, and this is not an area which the Houthis have operated in much before. My guess would be this might be piracy, because there's still quite a lot of it around, but we just don't know. And I guess that story will develop a little bit as the day goes on. The main thing for the maritime monitoring organisations is find out where the ship is and what is the condition of the crew, and is it being taken to a port or just left in the water, as it were. We'll hear a bit more about that, I think, during the day.
OK, lovely. Well, plenty more updates on that, as well as what's happening as regards the Houthis too. Michael Clark, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, some news just in. Workers employed by Fujitsu, the company that supplied the faulty IT system at the heart of the post office fraud scandal, are to go on strike in a dispute over pay. The strike is likely to affect people seeking to complete their self-assessment tax returns by the end of the month. The action is not connected with the Horizon scandal. Let's take a look at some of the other day's headlines now. And 11 people have been injured after 2 Russian missiles hit a hotel in Ukraine's largest city, Kharkiv. Local government said the strike, which involved S-300 missiles, happened at 10:30 p.m. local time. The US and allies have accused Russia of violating UN sanctions by using North Korean weapons. The government is exploring plans for the largest nuclear power expansion in 70 years. They include a potential new power station and investing up to £300 million in production of the fuel that's currently only produced in Russia. The move hopes to create jobs, reduce bills and strengthen Britain's energy security. Former England manager Sven-Göran Eriksson says he's been diagnosed with terminal cancer and only has a year to live. The 75-year-old revealed his diagnosis in a radio interview in his native Sweden. Sven was at the helm of English football from 2011 till 2016, is that? It says 2006. I think I've got the dates wrong then, but the year 2006 was when he led the national team to the World Cup quarter-final. He says he'll fight for as long as we can. And I'll get my dates sorted out and find out the truth on that one. In the meantime, though, let's take a look at the front pages of the papers. And the Metro leads with the headline, "Justice by Special Delivery," after the Prime Minister's announcement of special legislation to exonerate wrongfully convicted sub-postmasters. Justice also the word that features on the front of the Express. And here's the front of The Guardian, which says that hundreds of victims of the scandal will now have their convictions overturned. And it's the same story for the Financial Times, which says the proposed law could be brought before Parliament within weeks. So let's get some reaction to that story about the Post Office. Andrew Gwynn is Shadow Health Minister and he's here with me. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much. And I know that there's a Labour health announcement you want to make, which I'll let you come to in a moment. But The story that everybody is talking about is the post office scandal, and the government's moves yesterday to introduce this emergency legislation which will allow a blanket exoneration of those caught up in it. Does Labour fully back the government and its bill?
So we want to see justice by the sub-postmasters. We're still waiting to hear from the Justice Secretary about the finer details of the bill before Parliament, but we've always said that if it meets the test of justice, getting the compensation out more quickly, but also ensuring that those that were given convictions have their convictions wiped out, then we will support that, obviously. Of course we will.
And huge public backing for these people who've been so wronged, and a lot of support to see them exonerated. However, is there any concern that there may be one or two guilty people that are included in this who will also be exonerated and given compensation? Are you concerned about that?
Well, look, this has been such a scandal of a phenomenal scale and a real failure of the system. People's lives have been ruined. I've been taking up the case of my constituent, Della Robinson, who was one of the 555 litigants that successfully got their convictions quashed by the High Court a number of years ago. She was the sub-postmistress in a post office in my constituency. She lost everything. She was wrongfully convicted of false accounting in 2013. She lost her shop, she lost her home, she lost friends, she lost her reputation. And this, you know, isn't a one-off case. As we know, there are a great number of people that have been engulfed by this crisis, and we owe it to them to put this right.
And your constituents, as one of the group that went to the High Court and won, no doubt will be frustrated that they still haven't had any money as a result, even though they won their case. Is the feeling that the £75,000 that's being offered to them is going to go far enough?
Well, probably not, and there are alternatives. You can take your case to be reviewed, but that takes time. I want to see this sped up. I want to see fairness and justice for those that have been wronged by the Post Office. We owe it to them after all these years of misery.
Are you satisfied then with the levels of compensation being offered?
Well, look, I would like the government, obviously, to do the right thing. We've got a package in place. People do have a mechanism now, but obviously these sub-postmasters they've had their lives destroyed, and in some tragic cases, people have lost their lives, and I think that the level of compensation needs to recognise the scale of the hurt and damage that has been done to people across the country.
And this is taxpayers' money, isn't it? Would you like to see others contribute to that compensation if found to have been at fault?
Well, absolutely. And look, there's a bigger picture here. There's an inquiry going on. But if it is found that people have been hiding things, and we suspect they have, that they knew for a number of years, we need to make sure that justice is done for the sub-postmasters in respect of what happens to people who worked at Fujitsu, who worked at the Post Office, who denied that there was an issue but probably knew that there was. So we need to make sure that, as well as adequate compensation and timely compensation, we need to make sure, as well as quashing all of those convictions and wiping the slate clean for those sub-postmasters, that justice is also done in respect of those that had their fingerprints all over this scandal.
And Fujitsu, who were behind the Horizon software that was proved to be faulty, are you comfortable with Fujitsu having so many other government contracts?
Well, personally, I'm not. But the real focus right now has to be sorting this out for the Horizon scandal victims. I think that has to be our main focus right now. But really, it does beg a belief that the government was still giving contracts to a company like Fujitsu when it knew Fujitsu had failed the country on such a monumental scale.
And what about the fact that this is a law which essentially overturns what was decided in court? Does that set a dangerous precedent as far as the power of the judiciary is concerned?
Well, as I say, we will look at the detail of this bill when the Justice Secretary has released it, but these are exceptional circumstances. There was a systemic failure that damaged lives on a huge scale, and actually I think it's right that Parliament looks at an exceptional piece of legislation to deal with exceptional circumstances.
Tell us a little bit about what you're announcing today, what Labour wants to do about children's health. What are your plans?
So children in this country tend to be shorter, fatter and unhealthier than their counterparts across the world in developed countries. And we don't think that's acceptable. So we're putting together a child action plan on children's health being launched today by Keir Starmer, because we want the ambition of the next Labour government to have the healthiest children in the developed world. We want to make sure that children growing up in England today are the healthiest in all generations, and that is going to take a huge shift in how we do things. So it is about tackling the backlog. Do you know that we have over 408,000 children on the paediatric waiting lists in England? A third of them are waiting over 18 months. That's unacceptable.
OK. And one of the parts of this plan is to have a national supervised toothbrushing programme for 3 to 5-year-olds. I mean, you know you're going to be accused of introducing the nanny state here.
Oh, I get that. And look, lots of children know how to brush their teeth. But in some of the most deprived communities, children are, at very young ages are going to accident and emergency with severe tooth decay. And so we have to intervene, and we think that by bringing this measure into the new breakfast clubs that we will have in every primary school in England, that's the right way to start to get some of these public health messages through, to get children's teeth healthier. But it's also about mental health as well. We want to make sure that our children are the happiest. And we've got 200,000 children on mental health waiting lists. It's about tackling all of these things holistically so we have better kids.
OK. Andrew Gwynn, thanks very much indeed for coming in. Thank you. Let's take a look now at what the weather's doing.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, the next few days look mostly quiet and cold, with a stiff breeze bringing a significant wind chill to many. Southern and northwestern Britain and the west of Ireland are fairly clear but frosty now, while central and northeastern parts are a bit milder under cloudy skies. And there are some light showers around there. Central Britain will stay mostly cloudy all morning.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now then, could this be the car of the future? Let's take a look, because a flying car has been unveiled at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. At the flick of a button, it transforms into a helicopter, which could be handy to beat the traffic, but doesn't seem to be taking off there, disappointingly. Stay with us, we've got lots coming up for you, including we're going to be taking a closer look at how soon the new law to exonerate post office victims could be put into place. Plus, we'll tell you how bird flu has managed to reach seals in the Antarctic.
Breakfast is becoming even brighter here on Sky News. There's a new studio, a new start time of 6 a.m. and some new faces.
OK, yes, we'll bring you all the top stories from around the globe.
And here in Westminster as we count down to an election.
Plus a look ahead to the stories that will be making headlines on Sky News throughout the day.
That's your New Look Breakfast Show, weekdays 6 to 10 a.m. here on Sky News.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing. My most memorable story was covering the extreme zero COVID restrictions.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
This is a 4-lane dual carriageway, completely shut off. Some things are being allowed in, but actually the only thing we've seen coming out is an ambulance. The message from China is clear. This is a modernised military, absolutely able to fight an international war if needed. Is this military ready?
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to. By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets.
To the left, to the left!
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made. It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
There are people who are afraid.
On the streets of Xinjiang, there is still a tension. Heavy police, a sense they're always watching.
It's really an incredible eeriness to this place, and it just is completely abandoned. The Chinese housing market, for so long a driver of growth, is now a real liability. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's actually hard to describe the cold here. It's so intense. It literally takes your breath away.
I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling.
The world is watching what's happening here.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories here this morning. And the public inquiry into the Horizon scandal gets underway again today. Post Office investigators were given cash bonuses for successful convictions, according to some evidence heard there. The number of women dying during pregnancy or soon after childbirth has reached its highest level in 20 years. The report also identified clear examples of maternity systems under immense pressure. Israel is defending itself at the International Court of Justice today as South Africa claims that Israel's war with Hamas amounts to genocide against Palestinians. So let's get more on our top story now. And the public inquiry into the Post Office scandal resumes this morning. Hundreds of innocent postmasters will be exonerated and receive compensation under new legislation, which Rishi Sunak said he hopes to introduce in the next few weeks. So let's get some reaction to that. Joining me now are David Enright, who's a lawyer who represents 75% of postmasters before the public inquiry, and Lord Arbuthnot, who's a member of the Horizon Compensation Advisory Board, and who we saw portrayed in the ITV drama about this subject, which has sparked so much public interest and concern. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Lord Arbuthnot, to you first of all. Do you welcome the government's steps yesterday introducing this emergency legislation which gives a blanket exoneration to Post Office sub-postmasters?
I do, because we've had only 95 exonerations, overturning of convictions so far, and there are something like up to 1,000 convictions that we've had, and so the old system simply wasn't working. I'm delighted that we've got this new legislation coming through with new systems on redress for the sub-postmasters as well. It's good news.
David Enright, do you agree? What will this mean for the people that you represent? What's their reaction been?
I think the first thing we need to say is we need to acknowledge the contribution of Lord Arbuthnot and Kevin Jones, who've been champions of this for the last 15 years. So bravo, my lord. Secondly, I've been speaking to postmasters across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland over the last 24 hours to get their reaction. And they have a single reaction, which is fine words, butter, no parsnips. These are wonderful announcements, championed, as I say, by Lord Arbuthnot and Kevin Jones and others. But what your listeners or what your viewers need to know is no one has had their conviction quashed today or next week or next month. Lord Arbuthnot and others are working very hard to make those words into reality. Similarly, there were announcements about compensation yesterday. Again, your viewers need to know nobody today has received any compensation and they won't receive it next week or next month. So wonderful words in an election year. My clients are saying we want delivery. Secondly, this is a national scandal. We need a national response. So Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, announced proposals to quash convictions in England and Wales yesterday, but not Scotland, and certainly not Northern Ireland. And I know that is something that Lord Arbuthnot has been discussing with peers in the House last night.
OK, we'll deal with both those issues then and put them back to Lord Arbuthnot. First of all, do you understand why these victims who you've worked closely with for many years and tried to represent Lord Arbuthnot feel sceptical about progress when they've had so many frustrations up until now? Do you understand why some of them will say, all well and good, but just wait until I am actually exonerated and I have received my money before I feel pleased about this?
Oh, yes, I understand that. The way these people have been treated is shocking, and they shouldn't trust anybody. And the problem is that they don't trust anybody. But a lot of sub-postmasters have received some compensation, interim compensation. A few have agreed even final compensation. But it's all been far too slow. I hope that the Compensation Advisory Board that I sit on is able to help speed it up dramatically. It needs to be turbocharged. And the point that David makes about Scotland and Northern Ireland is a good point. The problem is that the England and Wales legal system is separate from those in Scotland and Northern Ireland. But I know that discussions have been taking place between Hamza Yousaf in Scotland and with politicians in Northern Ireland. And I feel absolutely certain that those two administrations will want to mirror what is happening in England and Wales. I think it would be suicidal for them if they didn't, because it's essential to get this sorted out as quickly as we possibly can.
What about the levels of compensation, David Enright? Are you satisfied that enough is being offered? It's £600,000 if you sign this declaration to say that you are not guilty. That gives you access to that money, and £75,000 for others involved in a different group.
Let's take that in two stages. One of the issues that so concerns Lord Arbuthnot is that 80% of the victims who were wrongfully convicted have not come forward at all and are showing no sign of coming forward. So that's 80% of the victims have not been exonerated and have no access to compensation at all. So we don't even need to talk about compensation yet. They don't have any and don't have a route to it. And that is why Lord Arbuthnot and others are trying to turbocharge, as he says it. The compensation issue is difficult. These sound like big numbers. The Prime Minister yesterday talked about £75,000 being a lump sum available to a certain class of person. A typical postmaster will have maybe invested £200,000 to £300,000 in purchasing their post office. They will have run it, they will have built it up, invested in it. Some of them then went on to develop 2 or 3 post offices. When the actions were taken against it by the post office, they lost their businesses, their investment, their pension, their income, their homes, their mental health. Some of them, as you know, were sent to prison. So £75,000 is not going to touch the size of that. Yeah? And you've also heard talk about Fujitsu. You know, we've heard the principle that the polluter pays. You know, there's another party in all of this. Fujitsu have huge, lucrative contracts right across government providing IT services. You know, I would be calling on Fujitsu now. Don't wait to be asked. Step forward, make your contribution to all of this.
They say, of course, they're contributing to the public inquiry, and we may well hear more.
Not contributing money.
That's right. Well, let's see what the outcome of the public inquiry is and see whether anything changes there. Lord Arbuthnot, I referred to this move that is included in the plans, whereby people sign a document saying, I'm innocent of any wrongdoing, and then they get access to compensation. But I was talking to one post office worker who said that they felt uncomfortable about having to sign a form like that. The implication is that in this blanket legislation, that there may be a few guilty people in there, and you have to kind of say yourself that you're innocent. Many people would prefer to go back into court, have the moment there in court where they're told you are not guilty, you have done nothing wrong. Do you feel some sympathy for that point of view?
I do, yes. The document issue is a difficult one because my constituent, Jo Hamilton, for example, pleaded guilty to false accounting. Is she going to say, I'm certain I didn't commit false accounting? She was exonerated by the Court of Appeal, and that was great because it was an affront to justice, what she went through. But the document is a difficult issue, and precisely what it says has yet to be decided and worked through. I think we're going to have to discuss that in the Compensation Advisory Board and with the Minister before we know exactly what the document can say, because it hasn't been drafted yet. The 600,000 and the £75,000 offers, though, I need to say this, they are not the maximum that would be available. Sub-postmasters who want to go through the process of proving that they've lost more will be able to recover more, and so they should. And that applies to the 75,000 and to the 600,000.
And what do you think, David Enright, about this issue of blanket exoneration? It's clearly been done to speed up the process, but do some of the people that you represent feel frustrated that they were prosecuted in court and they don't have that moment when they're exonerated in court too?
For any lawyer or parliamentarian, this is the sort of least worst option. Passing politicians should not be deciding if you or I are guilty or innocent. That's a matter for a jury of our peers and the independent judiciary, but we are where we are. But the message I want to leave your viewers with is this. Wonderful announcement yesterday. That announcement does not mean that anyone has been exonerated, and it does not mean that anyone has received compensation as a result of what Mr. Sunak said yesterday. That is a long way down the road. Great announcements. Let's have some delivery.
And Lord Arbuthnot, I wonder what your reflection on the last few weeks has been. As David Enright rightly said, you played a kind of starring role in the ITV drama, which has captured everybody's imagination. Are you surprised that it took that drama to galvanise politicians to make these changes this week?
I'm not surprised. I was involved in another campaign, the Chinook campaign, and I actually got a friend of mine who was a playwright to write a play, thinking that it might have a similar outcome. I don't care, frankly. Whatever it is that it took to get this issue onto the front burner, I'm happy. It is now on the front burner, and we must seize the moment and not lose momentum and get the money out of the door to the sub-postmasters and give them the redress that David so rightly is calling for.
And David, very quickly, do you feel the drama allow people to really identify with these very human stories? It was the moment that it really cut through what had happened to these people.
Yes, for example, your wonderful makeup team, you make me look like a male model. They're ready to stage a protest outside Westminster right now. They're, like all of us, outraged.
Exactly. It's really inspired the public imagination, hasn't it? Well, David Enright and Lord Arbuthnot, we really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much for coming in. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And just to let you know that you can keep up to date with all the details on the inquiry, which is expected to resume at 10 o'clock this morning. And you can follow our live blogging on the Politics Hub part of the website by scanning the QR code that you can see on your screen now. And of course, you can stick with us here too for all the updates. Do stay with us, we've got lots coming up for you. In a moment, I'm going to be joined by a British surgeon who recently left Gaza after working in Al-Aqsa Hospital. That's coming up.
Morning, everybody. It is 8 o'clock. You're very welcome to join us on Sky News wherever you're watching us. Chancellor will be joining us in just a few moments' time.
Evidence of the cost of living crisis. And we'll start with breaking news. There's only one place to start this morning against the dollar ever.
It was like night fell.
It's 5 o'clock. This is the News Hour. I'm Mark Austin. Coming up in the next 60 minutes.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
On the UK Tonight throughout the course of the week. Still to come.
Well, what happened was I had the nuts in the box, and the nuts was disappearing, first of all. So I thought, where's these nuts going? So I went into my cupboard I got out in the shed and went into the bottom drawer there. And in there I got an old pair of shoes, and it was full of nuts. So the mouse had taken them from the box and put them in the old shoes. So I thought, that's a bit odd, that. So the next thing happened was I had the nuts in there, and then I went in the next morning and there was some items put in the box. So I thought I'm going to set up a night camera, a trail camera, and that's what I done. And this is what I captured, as you can see what's on there now. The mouse was putting all the items, well, most of them, into the box on top of the nuts.
You couldn't believe what you were seeing, because the mouse is doing this in pitch black and is very meticulous at tidying.
That's what I mean, yeah. It's because this is infrared film, so it's not light like this, obviously. It's pitch black. Putting that stick on there is amazing, yeah.
So since you've recorded this, have you been leaving things out for the mouse to tidy up, hoping it will come back? What's been happening since?
Oh, it comes back every night. It's probably out there now.
Please tell me you leave out a little treat for doing all this hard work for you. No. You're quite messy, Rodney.
No, not yet, I haven't.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
Let's return now to the Middle East and the concerns of a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. With the IDF forces getting closer to Al-Aqsa Hospital, many medics, patients and displaced people have fled south to the crowded city of Rafah from central Gaza's last working hospital. Well, let's speak now to a British surgeon who was working at Al-Aqsa Hospital until he was forced to leave Gaza, Dr. Nick Maynard, who joins me now from Oxford. Very good morning to you, Dr. Maynard. Thanks so much for talking to us. So you've just returned from Gaza. Tell us about your time there.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me on your show. So I was at Al-Aqsa Hospital for 2 weeks, and we left Gaza on Monday morning to come home. What we saw was really quite shocking. I've been going to Gaza for 14 years, so I know Gaza really well. I know the hospitals very well. I've operated in them. And since October the 7th, we've been in daily contact with our friends and colleagues there. So we thought we were prepared for what we were going to see, but in fact, it was much worse. And we saw things in the hospital there that I would have hoped I would never see in any healthcare setting. It was really quite horrific what we witnessed.
So give us a bit of an idea of, are you talking about the kinds of injuries that you were having to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, the overcrowding was just horrific. The hospital is quite a small hospital. It has about 160 beds, but there were nearly 700 patients then when we were there, and with all their relatives, it meant the overcrowding was awful. There were many thousands of people there. Every square foot of the hospital was covered with patients or their relatives, some of them in beds, most of them on the floor. The injuries we saw, I mean, there were several hundred admissions a day, often only one or two doctors in the emergency department. They were supplemented by members of our team, but wholly inadequate numbers of staff to deal with the injuries. And that really meant the triage system, that the mechanism we all are familiar with in prioritising urgency of patients' admissions, the triage system collapsed completely because there were so few staff and so many patients. The injuries were awful. We saw many severe burn injuries on often very small children, many people brought in dead from their burn injuries, many limb injuries from the blasts of the bombs, with many traumatic amputations. And I operate on many patients with severe blast injuries to the abdomen and to the chest, causing a huge amount of internal damage inside the chest and the abdomen. So really quite appalling injuries. And of course, we only saw a minority of them because the vast majority of people in the vicinity of the blast were, of course, killed, and many of them still lying underneath the rubble.
And what about medical aid? How much is getting in?
There is medical aid getting in, but it's nothing like enough. And that's not because of the lack of effort from people trying to get in aid. We saw large numbers of lorries and trucks with aid being turned away at the Rafah border crossing. There is nothing like enough aid that's being allowed in to Gaza. And of course, so much of the country is now impassable because of the damage to the roads or because of the presence of the Israeli ground forces, that we know no aid is getting into northern Gaza, not enough aid was getting into middle Gaza, where I was, and we frequently ran out of resources. We ran out of drugs on many occasions, so on many days there was no morphine, there were no painkillers to give these poor children and adults in ED with these horrific burns. In theatres, we ran out of water one day, so we weren't able to scrub up properly, so we had to use alcohol gel to scrub up our hands. We ran out of sterile drapes for the patients in theatres. There were not enough sutures. So I could go on, but the resources are very inadequate.
Well, Dr. Nick Maynard, we really appreciate you coming on and telling us a little bit about the situation there in that hospital in Gaza. We do appreciate it. I don't know if you're due to head back at all at any point, very briefly.
Yes, I'll be. So another team from MAP is out there now. They went in yesterday. I'll be going back in about 6 to 8 weeks, and we'll go there regularly with MAP.
OK, well, I know we'll get updates from you, but Dr. Nick Maynard, we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Now, the family of a murder victim mistaken for Rupert Murdoch's wife offered a farmer £40,000 to let them dig up the land where they believe that she was buried. Muriel McKay was kidnapped and murdered in 1969 by two brothers, one of whom has offered to show detectives the exact spot where they left her. Sky's crime correspondent Martin Brunt has more.
It's her family's latest desperate bid to find the remains of murder victim Muriel McKay. in a letter to a landowner, an extraordinary offer, £40,000 to let them dig for her body. They believe she was buried behind the farmhouse more than 50 years ago. Muriel McKay was kidnapped in 1969. Two brothers, Arthur and Nizamuddin Hussain, were convicted of her murder, but her body was never found. Nizamuddin now says that Muriel died of a heart attack and they buried her at the farm. He's offered to show the family where.
But I still remember. I can still go to the spot.
The letter is asking for access, to pick my grandmother up. It's rather sad, really. For someone to come into your garden, do a bit of gardening, it's some money. It's a reasonable sum of money.
2 years ago, with the owner's permission, Scotland Yard excavated part of the farm and found nothing. The family say police dug in the wrong area. Detectives are reluctant to go back with a search warrant. If the landowner rejects your offer, what's your next move?
It will probably end up in some kind of civil action, which would be unfortunate, costly, pointless.
Muriel's family say they will never give up their search. Martin Brunt, Sky News.
Let's take a look now what the weather's doing.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the next few days look mostly quiet and cold, with a stiff breeze bringing a significant wind chill to many. Southern and northwestern Britain and the west of Ireland are fairly clear but frosty now, while central and northeastern parts are a bit milder under cloudy skies. There are some light showers there. Central Britain will stay mostly cloudy this morning, with patchy drizzly outbreaks tending to die away, while Ireland and northern and central Scotland will see the cloud breaking. Elsewhere, East Anglia and the East Midlands will cloud over, but other southern parts will keep a fair amount of sunshine, and it'll be a touch milder.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Do stay with us here on Sky News Breakfast. Lots coming up for you, including we'll be live at the Post Office inquiry, which gets underway again at 10 o'clock this morning. Plenty of reaction to that coming up. Hello everyone, it's 9 o'clock. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Vindication for postmasters. The government will introduce emergency laws to quash hundreds of false convictions. And this morning, the public inquiry resumes with pressure mounting for those responsible for the scandal to be held to account. It's Thursday, the 11th of January. The Energy Secretary tells this programme those at fault should pay up.
I'd like to see whoever is at fault contribute, and that's exactly why we set up an independent inquiry that will report back. And once we've got clear evidence on who's accountable, I think it's really important that they contribute.
Also ahead, the number of women who die during pregnancy has risen to its highest level in 20 years. The International Court of Justice considers whether Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. The family of a murder victim, mistaken for Rupert Murdoch's wife, offer a farmer £40,000 to let them dig up the land where they believe she was buried. And could this be the car of the future? A flying car is unveiled at the CES Tech Summit in Las Vegas. Hello, welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Let's talk to Serena and Molly now about what we've got coming up. And Serena, this story about the Post Office is at the top of so many people's minds. And the government introduced legislation yesterday. So what's the reaction been?
Well, it means that victims are closer to reaching compensation. But I think the conversations now will be, how did this happen in the first place and who's really to blame?
OK, more on that from you in a moment. And Molly, you're talking about maternity services and some of the challenges there.
Yeah, and a real rise in the number of women that are dying during pregnancy and, crucially, just weeks after they've given birth. A number you'd expect to be coming down as health services improve, but really quite a shocking rise.
Yeah, really shocking figures, those. We'll be talking about that in just a moment. In the meantime, though, now we know that hundreds of wrongly convicted postmasters will finally see justice. And with the public inquiry getting underway again this morning, attention is turning to those responsible for the scandal. Well, let's take you through the government's plan first. And the Prime Minister said he plans to make sure those convicted as part of the scandal will all be exonerated through an Act of Parliament. He added that anyone who has their conviction overturned will be given an upfront offer of at least £600,000 in compensation, or allowed to proceed with a detailed assessment process if they feel they should get more. A separate offer of £75,000 is being made to those who were caught up in the scandal but not convicted. Well, for those wrongly convicted on the evidence of the faulty system, the news is life-changing. But one former sub-postmaster told this programme a few minutes ago that he still had concerns.
The bit I'm wary about is the fact they want people to sign that innocent form, because that still will give the impression there's people who are guilty. So people might say, oh, is he actually guilty or is he innocent? And the horizon evidence is so unreliable, I would say everyone is innocent.
Well, the public inquiry into the scandal, which started in 2020, resumes today. It'll look into the original criminal investigations and examine who was responsible for failing to reveal the truth about the faulty computer system. The Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, has said there are also powers in place to ensure that witnesses appear before the statutory inquiry into the Horizon scandal. Well, our correspondent Adele Robinson is outside the inquiry in central London this morning. And Adele, proceedings get underway at 10 o'clock this morning, don't they? So what can we expect?
Yes, 10 o'clock this morning. This is phase 4 resuming. This is an inquiry that began, remember, back in 2021. Phase 4 will look at actions taken by investigators against sub-postmasters and mistresses. It'll also look at policy-making audits as well as those investigations. Today we can expect to hear evidence from a man called Stephen Bradshaw. He was involved in criminally investigating 9 sub-postmasters involved in the Post office scandal. Now, lead counsel to the inquiry, Jason Beer, KC, has already described Mr Bradshaw as having a heavy footprint in the scandal. Some postmasters have previously given evidence in their witness statements saying that they felt threatened and also humiliated by Mr Bradshaw's behaviour. He's also expected to be asked about an email in which he cut and paste from a Post Office PR release basically defending the reliability of the Horizon system, indicating that Mr Bradshaw did know about Horizon problems back in 2011. Now, of course, one key line of this inquiry today and in the days ahead will be looking at whether or not there were bonus schemes in place. There are allegations that investigators were offered cash incentives for sub-postmaster convictions. All of this to answer the broader question over what impact the Post Office scandal has had, who is to blame, and what went wrong.
OK, Adele, lots of updates from you throughout the day. For the moment, thanks for that. And let's bring in our political correspondent, Serena Barker-Singh, again, who's here with me. And the government was under huge pressure to act, wasn't it, after this big swell of public concern about this Post Office scandal. So remind us what they've announced and what the reaction's been to it.
I think you're right that they have acted swiftly this week, but it's come after years and decades of postmasters chasing for this justice. So what the Prime Minister announced yesterday was primary legislation, so new measures he will bring in, which will overturn convictions of all those wrongly convicted based on this evidence of the faulty Horizon system. Now, we're not exactly sure when that will come, when that will be brought to the House, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, but they do want compensation to be starting to be paid out at least by the end of the year. Now, it's quite an extraordinary step to intervene in the judicial process this way and to kind of cut across that. And I think some legal minds will be feeling uneasy about that. But the minister this morning that you spoke to, Claire Coutinho, said that that was a balancing act, that they were hoping for a significant move, and this was an extraordinary circumstance, and that's what warranted this move. Now, the main aim of the legislation is to unlock compensation, and they're doing that by quashing all these convictions, and then that will allow money to start trickling through. But on who will pay for that is still unclear. I understand the public inquiry will ascertain who was directly at fault, but the minister this morning gave a hint at the company Fujitsu and that they could be liable. I think we have a clip from earlier.
And will all this money be taxpayers' money, or would you like to see Fujitsu, who is behind the faulty Horizon software, contributing at all or paying out?
I'd like to see whoever is at fault contribute, and that's exactly why we set up an independent inquiry. That will report back, and once we've got clear evidence on who's accountable, I think it's really important that they contribute.
Evidence that's been heard at the inquiry is being highlighted today, saying that Post Office investigators were offered cash bonuses for every sub-postmaster who was convicted. What's your reaction to that?
Well, again, I think it's really important that the independent inquiry looks at everything and everyone that's at fault, and then we can make sure that there's redress at the end of it.
So Fujitsu say that they are working fully with the inquiry. They also apologise for any suffering they may have caused. The public inquiry was always going on underneath all of this. It's just been thrust into the public consciousness. But it is sitting today and it's in phase 4, so we should hear more throughout the day.
Yeah, it'll be a really interesting day, won't it? Serena, thanks very much indeed. And just to let you know that you can keep up to date with all the details on that story and the inquiry as well. As we say, it's expected to resume at 10 o'clock this morning, and you can follow our live blogging on the Politics Hub part of the website by scanning the QR code that you can see on screen now. And of course, do stick here with us here on Sky News 2 for all the updates. Now, the number of women dying during pregnancy or soon after childbirth has reached its highest level in 2 decades. Well, Molly Malone is here to tell us more about this. That sounds really shocking. So what details have we got?
It does, yeah. And I think the shocking factor really is in the rise. You'd expect these numbers to be coming down as, you know, we become more developed as a health system and things are meant to get better. But actually, the numbers are very much on the rise. The research comes from an organisation called Embrace, which monitors trends looking at stillbirths, infant deaths, but also maternity deaths. Crucially, the number of women also that die after having their child, after childbirth. And actually, I'm going to bring you some of the figures now. The data suggests that there were 13 deaths per 100,000 maternities between January 2020 and December 2022. And then even with COVID deaths excluded, there was still that number of 13 in 100,000 is still a rise on the figures from 3 years earlier when that number was 9 in every 100,000 women. Now, to the viewer at home, that doesn't look like a massive number, 9 in 100,000, 13 in 100,000, but actually the point is this number's getting bigger, it's not reversing. And in terms of why that's happening, now they say the core reason is something called thrombosis, which is blood clotting in the veins. COVID's also a massive part of it, so that's the second biggest cause. Other factors include heart disease and poor mental health. And the research also noted that there are various different inequalities. So as a black woman, you're 3 times more likely for this to happen to you than you are a white woman. And also an Asian woman, twice more likely to die than a white woman. Women living in deprived areas, so poor access to health and education, also more likely to suffer as a result of this. Clearly a very concerning trend. The NHS do point to the fact that they've invested for the last decade in maternity services, but this is something clearly they'll need to monitor as it seems to be getting worse.
Absolutely, and we'll be asking a few questions of the people behind that research shortly. Molly, thanks very much indeed. Now, Israel is defending itself at the UN's highest court today against allegations that it's committing genocide in Gaza. These are the proceedings underway in The Hague. Let's just dip in and have a listen.
Racial and ethnical group in the wake of the attacks in Israel on 7 October 2023. South Africa contends that the acts and omissions by Israel of which it complains are genocidal in character because, I quote, they are intended to bring about the destruction of a substantial part of the Palestinian national, racial, and ethnical group, that being the part of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip, end of quote. South Africa asserts that the relevant acts are attributable to Israel, which has failed to prevent genocide and is committing genocide, and which has also violated and continues to violate other fundamental obligations under the Genocide Convention. The application contains a request for the indication of provisional measures pursuant to Article 41 of the Statute of Court and Articles 73, 74, and 75 of the Rules of Court. According to South Africa, I quote, provisional measures are necessary in this case to protect against further severe and irreparable harm to the rights of the Palestinian people under the Genocide Convention, which continued to be violated with impunity. South Africa requests that the court indicate provisional measures to protect and preserve those rights, as well as its own rights under the Convention, and to prevent any aggravation or extension of the dispute pending the determination of the merits of the issues raised by the application, end of quote. The registrar will now read out the passage from the request specifying the provisional measures which the government of South Africa is asking the court to indicate. You have the floor, Mr. Registrar.
Thank you, Madam President. I quote, 1. The State of Israel shall immediately suspend its military operations in and against Gaza. 2. The State of Israel shall ensure that any military or irregular armed units which may be directed, supported, or influenced by it, as well as any organizations and persons which may be subject to its control, direction, or influence, take no steps in furtherance of the military operation referred to point 1 above. 3. The Republic of South Africa and the State of Israel shall each, in accordance with their obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in relation to the Palestinian people, take all reasonable measures within their power to prevent genocide. 4. The State of Israel shall, in accordance with its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, in relation to the Palestinian people as a group protected by the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, desist from the commission of any and all acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention, in particular, A. Killing members of the group, B. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, C. deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. 5. The State of Israel shall, pursuant to point 4c above, in relation to Palestinians, desist from and take all measures within its power, including the rescinding of relevant orders, of restrictions and/or of prohibitions to prevent A. The expulsion and forced displacement from their homes. B. The deprivation of B1. Access to adequate food and water. B2. Access to humanitarian assistance, including access to adequate fuel, shelter, clothes, hygiene and sanitation. B3, medical supplies and assistance. And C, the destruction of Palestinian life in Gaza. 6. The State of Israel shall, in relations to Palestinians, ensure that its military, as well as any irregular armed units or individuals which may be directed, supported or otherwise influenced by it, and any organizations and persons which may be subject to its control, direction or influence, do not commit any acts described in 4 and 5 above, or engage in direct and public incitement to commit genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, or complicity in genocide. And insofar as they do engage therein, that steps are taken towards their punishment pursuant to Articles 1, 2, 3 and 4 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. 7. The State of Israel...
So proceedings underway there in The Hague at the International Court of Justice, where Israel is today defending itself against claims brought by South Africa that it's committing genocide in Gaza. We'll keep a very close eye on events there in The Hague throughout the day.
The State of Israel...
Now, British and American forces are considering military action against Houthi rebels in Yemen after they defied a warning to stop attacking ships in the Red Sea. The Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, hinted that Western countries could launch airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen. On Tuesday night, a British warship stopped a drone attack. Grant Shapps said yesterday he has no doubt that Iran is behind the attacks and that enough is enough.
Saw this huge attack last night by the Houthi militants, but be in no doubt at all, Iran is guiding what is happening there in the Red Sea, providing them not just with equipment to carry out those attacks, but also often with the eyes and ears to allow those attacks to happen. Enough is enough as far as we're concerned. So we must be clear with the Houthis that this has to stop. And that is my simple message to them today, and watch this space.
Now, an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman has been boarded by unauthorised people in military uniforms. The UK Marine Trade Operations says the incident began early this morning in waters between Oman and Iran, in an area where ships transit in and out of the Strait of Hormuz. Let's take a look now at some of the day's other headlines. And 11 people have been injured after 2 Russian missiles hit a hotel in Ukraine's largest city, Kharkiv. Local government said the strike, which involved S-300 missiles, happened at 10:30 p.m. local time. The US and allies have accused Russia of violating UN sanctions by using North Korean weapons. The government is exploring plans for the largest nuclear power expansion in 70 years. They include a potential new power station and investing up to £300 million in production of the fuel that's currently only produced in Russia. The move hopes to create jobs, reduce bills and strengthen Britain's energy security. Yorkshire County Cricket Club's board has agreed to recommend its members approve a financial deal that could lead to former chairman Colin Graves taking control again. Mr Graves presided over Yorkshire Cricket during a period in which it admitted a charge of failing to address the systemic use of racist or discriminatory language. Now, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie has withdrawn from the race for the Republican nomination in the US presidential election. But the Donald Trump ally turned critic vowed to never let him become US president again. Christie was trailing badly, with one poll showing his support at just 2%. Before announcing his decision, he was caught on a microphone saying another candidate, Nikki Haley, was going to get smoked by Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, look, she spent $68 million so far, just on TV. Spent $68 million so far, $59 million by DeSantis, and we spent 12. I mean, who's punching above their weight and who's getting a return on their investment, you know? And she's going to get smoked, and you and I both know it. She's not up to this.
Well, Donald Trump chose not to attend last night's Republican debate in Iowa, instead doing a town hall with Fox News, where he responded to Chris Christie withdrawing from the race and his hot mic moment.
Chris Christie was in, and he got a hot mic I heard about. I thought, actually, the bigger story wasn't the fact that he dropped out. Nobody cared too much about that. But he had a hot mic where he was talking to somebody about the weather, and he happened to say that she doesn't have what it takes. She'll be creamed in the election. And, I mean, I know her very well, and I happen to believe that Chris Christie's right. That's one of the few things he's been right about, actually.
Now, under pressure, maternity services, the number of women dying during pregnancy or childbirth has reached its highest level in 2 decades. I'm going to be speaking in just a moment to an expert in maternal health. Plus, Muriel McKay's family offer a landowner thousands to search for her body after the killer reveals where she's buried. Our crime correspondent has more.
Breakfast is becoming even brighter here on Sky News. There's a new studio, a new start time of 6 a.m. and some new faces.
McKay, yes, we'll bring you all the top stories from around the globe.
And here in Westminster as we count down to an election.
Plus a look ahead to the stories that will be making headlines on Sky News throughout the day.
That's your new look breakfast show, weekdays 6 to 10 a.m. here on Sky News.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing. My most memorable story was covering the extreme zero COVID restrictions.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
This is a 4-lane dual carriageway, completely shut off. Some things are being allowed in, but actually the only thing we've seen coming out is an ambulance. The message from China is clear. This is a modernized military, absolutely able to fight an international war if needed. Is this military ready?
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to.
Hey.
By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets.
To the left.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made. It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
There are people who are afraid.
On the streets of Xinjiang, there is still a tension. Heavy police, a sense they're always watching.
It's really an incredible eeriness to this place, and it just is completely abandoned. The Chinese housing market, for so long a driver of growth, is now a real liability. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's actually hard to describe the cold here. It's so intense. It literally takes your breath away.
I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling.
The world is watching what's happening here.
Now, the number of women dying during or soon after pregnancy in the UK has hit the highest levels for nearly 2 decades. The data has been compiled in a study led by Oxford Population Health's National Perinatal Epidemiology Unit and will form a wider report to be published later in the year. Well, Marion Knight is Professor of Maternal and Child Population Health at the unit and joins us now. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning. We do appreciate it. First of all, tell us a little bit about what you've learned with these figures. I mean, it sounds pretty startling, the number of people dying during pregnancy or soon after, being at the highest rate for almost 20 years.
That's exactly right. So I do want to start by emphasising to women that maternal death, so death during pregnancy or up to 6 weeks after pregnancy, is still rare in the UK. We're talking about 13 women for every 100,000. But it's widely recognised that maternal mortality rates are a measure of the health of the whole maternity care system. And there's no doubt that this rise is particularly concerning.
And there are racial inequalities as well, aren't there?
So we've known that there have been significant racial equalities between maternal mortality rates for Black women, Asian women and white women. And these figures show that Black women are still 3 times more likely to die compared with white women. And for Asian women, that's their rate is double that of white women.
So why is this happening?
So we can see from the figures that there are particular increases in, for example, deaths of women from blood clots. And we know that in many instances, those blood clots are occurring in women who are overweight and obese. And we do need to think about pre-pregnancy health and thinking about making sure women are as healthy as they can be before pregnancy. But we also can see signs of maternity systems under pressure. And it is of particular concern that we're seeing these rates increasing when we know that there are many pressures on maternity units. And it's not just the few units that are hitting the headlines with significant maternity inquiries. We've got to think about the whole maternity system and how we need to make sure that we're providing the care women need.
And the dates that these figures cover are from January 2020 to December 2022. And of course, that will beg the question, how much has COVID got to do with this?
It's a really good question. And actually, 38 women died from COVID, not just with COVID, but from COVID. But when we exclude those women's deaths, we still have a statistically significant increase in maternal deaths compared with the previous 3 years. And what's particularly concerning is that increase is largely in direct causes of death. So those conditions that we typically think of as pregnancy related. So things like preeclampsia, high blood pressure, bleeding in or around childbirth, but also mental health related causes. So maternal suicide. And so those are very much conditions that are experienced by women in and around childbirth, and so indicate that we need to be thinking about maternity services as well as the wider care system for pregnant women.
And also, what have you found out about what difference it can make whether or not you come from a wealthy background or a deprived background? Does that feed into the figures at all?
It's a particularly stark finding that for women that live in the 20% most deprived areas, they have more than twice the mortality rate of women who live in the wealthiest 20% of areas. And it's important to recognise that the ethnic disparities that we see are not solely due to differences in wealth. So we are seeing that that access to care for women from those areas which are less affluent is clearly impacting on their overall maternal health.
The government might point out that it's investing millions in maternity services. You say the system needs to be looked at. What would you like to see happen?
So I think there are many things we need to see. I think we need to recognise that Pregnancy health is everyone's responsibility, so we need to recognise that you should be trained in pregnancy health wherever you are in the healthcare system, so that if a pregnant woman is admitted under your service, or you are seeing them in accident and emergency or a clinic, you know what to do, or you know who to speak to. We know that we need more midwives, but we also need midwives who are trained to care for women who have complex and pre-existing conditions, both physical, mental and social conditions. So we need to recognise that the population of women giving birth now are not the same as the population of women giving birth 20 years ago. Women have many more health conditions that we need to care for. And importantly, we need to recognise the wider public health measures that we need to put in place to make sure that women are healthy before they become pregnant. So thinking about obesity, physical activity, environment, so that we are enabling women to be as healthy as they can be before they choose to have children.
OK, well, Professor Marion Knight, really interesting to get your thoughts on these statistics. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the former England manager, 75-year-old Sven-Göran Eriksson, says he's been diagnosed with terminal cancer and only has a year to live. Well, our sports correspondent, Rob Harris, can tell us more. And, Rob, this is terribly sad news for such a big footballing figure.
Devastating. Sven-Göran Eriksson is only 75 years old. He said he felt no particular ill health. He was still running 5 kilometres a day, and he went to see his doctors, and that's when the diagnosis came of terminal cancer. He said it can't be treated, and he's just trying to effectively forget about it as best he can, knowing that things are not looking good. I mean, Sven-Göran Eriksson's had such an impression on English footballers, the first foreign manager of the England national team, taking over in 2001, leading the golden generation all the way through to 2006. Some said he didn't deliver the success that might have been expected with David Beckham, Wayne Rooney, Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard. But I think really what he did help to achieve with his quarter-final finishes at the World Cup in 2002 and 2006, and also the quarters at Euro 2004, what he achieved there was accentuated by what followed him, where England actually failed to reach the next tournaments at the Euros, struggled at the next couple of World Cups as well. And he really did lead England through a quite notable period of the celebrity culture exploding, but certainly very sad news, the fact that Sven-Göran Eriksson, who had been managing until fairly recently the likes of the Philippines, Mexico and various other national team jobs. He went to coach Manchester City after England too, and you know, we do associate him with perhaps with some of the more celebrity side of football, but he was a manager who's had great success, particularly at Lazio in Italy before he got that England job in 2001. But yeah, very sad news, the fact that he is now fighting cancer, and he said the prognosis is pretty bad.
Oh, yeah, terrible news. Rob, thanks very much indeed for filling us in on some of the details. Thank you. Let's take a look now what the weather's doing.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the next few days look mostly quiet and cold, with a stiff breeze bringing a significant wind chill to many. Southern and northwestern Britain and the west of Ireland are fairly clear but frosty now, while central and northeastern parts are a bit milder under cloudy skies. There are some light showers around there. Central Britain will stay mostly cloudy this morning, with some patchy drizzly outbreaks tending to die away, while Ireland and northern and central Scotland will see the cloud breaking. Elsewhere, East Anglia and the Midlands will cloud over, but other southern parts will keep a fair amount of sunshine.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Lots coming up for you here on Sky News Breakfast, including an inquiry into the Post Office scandal resumes in the next hour after a new law to overturn hundreds of convictions is announced. I'm going to be speaking to former sub-postmaster Satyan Siju. Also, what's so special about this mysterious plant? We'll reveal all later on this hour. Well, let's get more now on the post office scandal. We can hear the experience now of former sub-postmaster Satyan Siju, who joins me now. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning. I want to get your reaction to what the government has done this week, the announcements that it's made. But first of all, tell us a little bit about your story and what you've had to go through.
Well, I had a post office in Tolworth, which is very close to Kingston upon Thames. And I've run it from 2001 to 2006. And towards the end of 2004 and 2005, just getting the kind of like a shortfalls, like £100 and £120 and £200 and things like that. When we ring the helpline and they will say that, okay, that loss actually has to be, we have to put the money and just to clear it, and which is a small amount, and we're just getting through it. Then around 2006, and I got a shortfall of £15,000. So I just reported to my line manager to come and have a look at it, and because I can't find any kind of a transaction which has gone through around a bigger amount like that. So she come to my post office, then she made a count of all the money and everything. She said, yes, it is a 15,000 short. So then she asked me to go out of the post office counter and stay into the shop floor. So I just stayed there. Then she was on the phone and called somebody, and there's two gentlemen come, and they done a complete so-called audit. And then they said it is about 20,000, just over 20,000 is the shortfall. I said, I just got shocked because it's nowhere near. I didn't take, and I know I completely trusted my staff, and there's no way they're going to take any money. But what happened is I've been invited for post office interrogation team. There is two of them there, and they actually interview me under caution. And they were actually forcing me to say that is I take the money or I done the false accounting. I don't have no legal representatives on that time. I only had a National Federation, the union rep, and he just took me outside and he asked me to admit the false accounting and to give the money back. Otherwise, you're going to go to prison. So I went inside and I admitted and I done false accounting, and they forced me to pay the money back. And I don't have 20,000 to pay straight away, but they asked me to pay the check on the same day. So I begged them to accept a 15,000 check. I paid it on the day. Then I give another 5,000 later on. So then it's about, then I got suspended, and in 3 months later, they took my post office away, not even give me any chance to sell the post office either. From that particular day, because the news went into the newspaper and everything, the postmaster steal the money, and my life is completely changed. My life is completely changed in a sense, and I go abused by the people, and racially abused and physically abused, mentally abused, and I go 2 times, there is people come and spit into my face, and I got thrown things into me, and I've been treated like a thief, and I've been treated like the lowest creature in the world. And so it's completely turned my life. And I was a very confident businessman. I had 2 businesses and 2 houses, and I was doing brilliant. And then I've been thinking that it is how it's happened, and I couldn't get through, and I couldn't actually process into my brain. I went home, I got some low moments, and I was thinking to take my life. And then my daughter found out I've been forced to leave the country because I need to get some mental health treatment. So I've been forced to go to India to do the treatment. I was there for 4 years. And my daughter, she was actually about to sit in for an A-level exam, and she was an A-star student for the GCSE, and she was into a grammar school, and she stayed with me on my bed, near my bed, to make sure I don't take my life away. And she lost a complete education. And is any money? I lost everything. I lost all my hard earnings and all, my houses, my businesses, and everything is gone. But probably somebody can compensate me with the money. So my biggest loss is my daughter's education. So who can actually give that back to me? And who can, sorry, it doesn't give anything for her. And is the money can, yes, it's 20 years and about 17 years I'm waiting for justice. And that 17 years, still the post office is actually mitigating me for the claims I'm putting through. And my, it's not only, go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say you've been through so much, and clearly, as you say, there are some things that
I lost everything.
Yeah,
I lost everything, and I would go.
I was going to just ask you how you feel about the steps that the government is now taking, this approach of introducing legislation to give a blanket exoneration for the people caught up with this, and compensation as well. What's your reaction to that? Do you feel that goes far enough?
I'll say it's a mixed reaction because yes, we really welcome for the the clearing everybody's name, because there are so many other post offices. They don't have the means to go to a court and pay the legal fees and clear themselves. And if it's a government do that, and we widely welcome. I'm actually not talking only for myself, and it's talking for everybody else, and it is widely welcome. But the 75,000 compensation they are actually offering, which is far, far lower than what we actually gone through and what we lost. And it's probably that every different claim is actually taken, my opinion is taken individually and assess it, rather than they're saying, okay, 75,000 for everybody. It's probably okay for somebody's loss, and it's not okay for everybody's loss.
Okay.
And we have lost, and a lot of money we lost.
Yeah, well, Satyan Siju, we really appreciate you coming on and telling us a little bit about what you've been through. I'm so sorry that
it's my pleasure.
You had such a terrible time, but we do appreciate you sharing it with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And just to let you know that if you've been at all affected by anything that we've discussed there, do remember that you can contact the Samaritans helpline on 116 123. Now then, we've got a little bit of breaking politics news now, and an update on two Conservative by-elections. These are for Peter Bone's seat in Wellingborough in Northamptonshire, as well as Chris Skidmore's in Kingswood in Gloucestershire. So Serena is back with us, our political correspondent. So, Serena, get us up to date. We knew that these two MPs were leaving their seats, so what's the latest?
Yes, exactly. We were expecting two by-elections at least this year, Wellingborough and Kingswood, as you said, but now we are getting a sense a little bit more about when. So the government chief whip, Simon Hart, has just issued writs in for the vacant seats in Parliament this morning, which kicks off the process, and essentially they're sort of formal instruments which authorise the holding of a general election or a by-election in this case. And that means they can be held 21 to 27 working days after the writs are issued, if it's all voted on into the House. But that's sort of a formal process. Now, a reminder of how this came about. So in Wellingborough, that's Peter Bone's seat, that follows a recall petition by his constituents. And that was following a parliamentary report finding that he had bullied and sexually harassed a staff member. Now, he does still continue to deny these allegations. But in Kingswood, so that's Chris Skidmore's, both Tory MPs, I should say. Chris Skidmore's a former energy minister, and he resigned in opposition to the government's plan to issue new licences for the extraction of oil and gas in the North Sea. So I think Labour will be eyeing up both seats. They've been pleased that in 2023 they had a bit of a knack for winning these by-elections. Once two in one day, Tamworth and Mid Beds. So we know there's a potential for at least these two by-elections. I think with the general election that Rishi Sunak promised at the beginning of this year, it's going to be a very big campaigning year.
Yeah, it already feels like the campaigning started, actually, doesn't it? OK, Serena, thanks very much indeed. And we'll wait to get a final date for those by-elections. Yeah, OK, Serena, thank you. Now, do stay with us. We've got lots coming up, including another year of botanical discoveries. Kew Gardens shares its top 10 new species, and we'll be there live to speak to an honorary research associate.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing. My most memorable story was covering the extreme zero COVID restrictions.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
This is a 4-lane dual carriageway, completely shut off. Some things are being allowed in, but actually the only thing we've seen coming out is an ambulance. The message from China is clear. This is a modernized military, absolutely able to fight an international war if needed. Is this military ready?
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to.
Hey.
By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets.
To the left.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made. It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
There are people who are afraid.
On the streets of Xinjiang, there is still a tension. Heavy police, a sense they're always watching.
It's really an incredible eeriness to this place. I mean, it just is completely abandoned. The Chinese housing market, for so long a driver of growth, is now a real liability. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's actually hard to describe the cold here. It's so intense. It literally takes your breath away.
I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling.
The world is watching what's happening here.
Slightly minutes, slightly better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Now, the waiting list for routine hospital treatment in England has fallen for the second month in a row. That's according to figures just out from NHS England. So let's get more on this. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi is at the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading for us this morning. Very good morning to you, Ashish. So what do these figures tell us?
They tell us that the NHS over winter has managed to cope extremely well, given the pressures, the industrial action, the rising rates of COVID and flu, and the seasonal pressures that the colder temperatures bring with frailty, falls, accidents and respiratory illnesses. The top line really here is that the waiting list, that big figure we look at every month, has fallen from 7.7 last month to 7.6 million this month. To put this in context, it is still higher than it was last year. But what the government and the NHS will tell you is that it's had to cope with more than a year of industrial action when we've seen 1.5 million more appointments added to that growing waiting list. Over the Christmas period, we saw 113,000 appointments cancelled, postponed or delayed because of that industrial action. So the industrial action has certainly had an impact. And these figures, to put this into some sort of context, this figure for the number of patients waiting for procedures or appointments, this data only goes up until November. So we'll see the impact that the industrial action, the junior doctor strikes, has had next month. So this list, which was inching or edging towards 8 million, there has been a stop for 2 successive months put on that, but we will see an impact next month because of this industrial action. But certainly the NHS or NHS England will pay tribute to the staff, the consultants, the doctors, the nurses, all the staff who have worked through the winter to try and bring this elective waiting list down. Last month was a record for the number of procedures carried out. But again, I stress this is prior to the industrial action that's been taken. Some more context as well. Although we are seeing the COVID and flu cases beginning to edge up slightly or put more pressure on the general system, it hasn't been as busy as previous winters. We haven't seen a surge in flu and COVID cases the way we have over the past 12 months. So that will have helped, but certainly the figures, that top line, the 7.6 million, is down from what it was last year, and that is a key election pledge made by the Prime Minister. We'll see what impact that the strikes will have had next month, but anyone working in the NHS will tell you that the pressure doesn't ease up. They will continue working, although the worst of it seems to be over. They will continue going from the winter pressures and start preparing for their spring and summer pressures. But that's further down the line. But certainly a little bit of good news, but not good news if you're one of those 7.6 million patients still waiting for what could be life-enhancing surgery or treatment of care.
Absolutely. Well, Ashish, thanks very much indeed for that update. Thank you. Now, the Antarctic seal is the latest species to be hit by bird flu. Scientists think that the virus was probably introduced by birds migrating to the sub-Antarctic from South America. Well, scientists have been testing animals on the island of South Georgia after several birds were found dead back in October. It's the region's first case of infected mammals, as our science correspondent Thomas Moore reports.
The giants of Antarctica have fallen to bird flu. Dozens of elephant seals are known to have died on the sub-Antarctic island of South Georgia. Many others will have succumbed out to sea or in remote bays. Now, scientists from the UK's Animal and Plant Health Agency have confirmed a deadly form of the H5N1 virus has been detected in dead elephant and fur seals, as well as seabirds. The species live together on crowded beaches.
At the moment, there's no evidence of mammal-to-mammal spread within the seal populations, and we think that it's environmental contamination and the interactions in these complex ecosystems that's driving the exchange of virus between these creatures.
The variant of the virus has been spread around the world by migrating birds. It was detected in seabirds in the Antarctic region last October and now mammals, but there's no sign the virus has mutated to thrive in seals.
Every time the virus spills over from birds into mammals, there is concern because it increases the chances of it undergoing genetic changes that help it to adapt. But so far, there's no good evidence that it has, and the risk to human health is still very low.
Wildlife experts describe the deaths in seals and birds as a mass mortality event. So far, penguins have been unaffected, but all bets are off if it reaches the Antarctic continent.
That would affect global population of emperor penguins, a very large proportion of the world's Adelie penguins as well. And there's several species of ice seal down there, so leopard, crab-eater and Weddell seals that could be infected. So yeah, these are all species that really aren't found anywhere else, so this would have global repercussions on Antarctic wildlife.
Bird flu is a deadly new threat in an ecosystem already reeling from climate change. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Let's take a check now on the weather.